Very much, Kathy, and I really like what you said, that cities matter more than ever today. So I think it's really true. We all know that. I don't know, Sina, do you have anything that you want to add to what Kathy mentioned, or? No. I think she had a very concrete and very practical response, so I think it was quite good. And then I hope also this conference is going to open doors and help to establish a lot of these collaborations and peer-to-peer exchanges, and also cross-sectoral exchanges. I maybe then, Sina, if you don't want to add anything here, so maybe I come up with another question for you. And why do you think these days cities are striving to play a more active role in the international arena? Why is it happening now?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm struggling with this. Here we go. No? Thank you. Struggling with mics. So yeah, thank you for that question, Katrina. I think there are several reasons which we will explore during the conference, but let me maybe throw in some food for thought. So obviously one point that has already been mentioned by Kathy, I mean, we are focusing in this conference on city diplomacy on the African continent, I mean of African cities with other subnational entities. And if we look at the African region, it's one of the world region where urban growth is actually the highest, so which means that cities accumulate population, and we should also think about cities' roles in representing these citizens internationally as well. So I think urban growth rates is one of the reasons. Another reason is, and this is, I mean, adapts to other cities in the world, is globalization in general. And that through globalization, we saw that states' borders, like there's some sort of erosion of states' borders, and cities are more and more connected, cities and other subnational entities again. There's also lots of economic growth happening in cities, and these economic networks also contribute to a greater proximity between cities. And this network is facilitated by digitization. I mean, we're in a digital age, so which also brings cities in the global world closer together, and which facilitates exchange between cities and subnational entities. And one thing that has already been mentioned by Kathy as well is that cities are more and more recognized as experts of specific global challenges, because again, cities accumulate populations, and then it's also in cities where some of these policy challenges like climate change are concentrated. So we have a lot of expertise in cities and other subnational entities. And as a consequence, yeah, again, these actors and stakeholders are recognized as policymakers. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. One of them, the SDG number 11, is actually dealing with cities as such, but also cities and subnational entities are involved in the realization of all the other SDGs. So I think the SDGs and the whole agenda related to them shows that subnational entities are more and more recognized as international players. Yeah, I think I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Sina. I think that was quite clear and quite convincing why we do need to engage in city diplomacy, and why cities are becoming more and more important, also because they represent the population that they are accumulating. But I just want to maybe, because Kathy has a lot of the practical experience also dealing with these issues, I want to ask, are we not heading there for a conflict? You know, if city diplomacy, if cities play a more active role, can they really exist and interact within the existing international system? And do we have examples of how cities successfully acted or addressed certain issues and played an active role in the international arena? Do you have any examples from C40?
Thanks, Katerina. And I don't think that there's necessarily a conflict. I think that it can be quite complementary. One thing that we've seen at C40 cities is that research published in 2020 found that networks of cities are replacing nation states as the primary advances of climate policy at a global level, in parallel, like I was saying, complementary, but sometimes in defiance of their national government. I think there can be a balance there. So cities can influence global agenda by participating in international policy arenas, and that helps to ensure that cities' voices are heard and that their priorities are actually reflected in these international policy instruments. Cities are also closer to their residents, so they understand, they're in stronger positions to understand the immediate needs of their citizenry and make rapid policy decisions that can be visible on ground. And we saw this in COVID-19, where cities had to act very quickly and actually were influencing national as well. It can exist, I think, through mobilization of networks amongst subnational actors. When cities work together, we've seen that they have a greater impact in global policy that they typically achieve by acting alone through networks such as UCLA, ICLE, SDI, Metropolis, C40 cities. Cities are able to build a collective voice to engage in and influence global policy debates to support cities' agendas. And then global initiatives that promote stronger collaboration between national governments as well as subnational leaders in setting and implementing climate targets are especially useful. And we're seeing that now with CHAMP coming on after COP28. Through city-to-city diplomacy, cities can build relationships with donors to attract cooperation and finance, something we're seeing particularly in the Africa region in C40 cities, that strengthening those diplomatic relationships with national governments as well as investors, development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, can help to secure direct investment and steer discourse around national and international financing, which is something we're seeing as an urgent need in order to be able to meet the climate ambitions that cities have. I do have some examples. My colleague talked about SDG 11, which was as a result of the Urban SDG campaign, where city networks and urban organizations campaigned for an SDG that was committed to cities and human settlements. That resulted in the SDG 11. We have Urban 20. In 2017, cities created their own space in the G20 ecosystem. The U20 is now the official city group engaging with G20, bringing an urban perspective to the G20 and advocating for ambitious and equitable climate action. We have COP28, the LCAS, Local Climate Action Summit as well, and this recognized the critical role local leaders play in reducing emissions, addressing climate risk, and supercharging national efforts to move further and faster in climate progress. And then the 2023 Africa Climate Summit here in Nairobi, which served as a platform for cities to inform, frame, and influence climate commitments. City of Nairobi, led by Governor Sakaja, in collaboration with the city of Abidjan, were able to convene a roundtable with C40 cities on green jobs, and they emphasized the commitment by member cities of C40 to drive creation of 50 million good green jobs by 2030. And after that, a call to action was signed by 12 African mayors calling on national and international leaders to support this ambition. So these are a few of examples of how cities are engaging in global mechanisms and achieving results as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. I think that's quite an exhaustive, quite a big list. So I think we really can see there is a lot of value and a lot of things are coming out of the cities and city leaders. And as I said at the beginning, also sometimes the city leaders can take bold actions and they can challenge, and then they put more ambitious goals in front of everyone, and especially also in front of their national governments, which is really great. This is something that we need. At this point, I just also want to ask, because you're going to be engaged in this conference for another 2 days, I want to invite the audience as well. If you have any questions for our speakers, or if you have any thoughts, any ideas you want to throw now to raise. If you can be very brief, because we don't have a lot of time, I don't want to delay things, so let's be brief, but I invite at least 2-3 interventions from the room here, so please, welcome. I think there was a hand of the gentleman there. If you can please introduce yourself when you speak.
Thank you so much. My name is Ridhiwani Sadiki. I'm from Citizen Network for Rural Development. We are in policy and strategy space. I'm from Coast Region, precisely Taita Taveta County. I have 3 key questions where when we answer these questions, actually they'll give us a strategic way of achieving what we are talking about. And the first question is there a practical development partners coordination framework among the states or local government or other municipalities? I mean, this one will help us avoid duplication of programs and projects. Because if you look at in Nairobi, there is a lot which is there, but there is also duplication. Mm-hmm. The second question is on how will these conversations, of course, help in mainstreaming the SDGs, Agenda 2030, African Agenda 23, and the current public benefit organization framework? Because these framework is there, and if we use these strategies to make sure that they are implemented, then it becomes easier for us to push the agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you addressing your questions to someone specifically, or or you are just raising these questions for the conference? Okay. Maybe we can just invite, if there is another intervention. Yes, please. A gentleman here.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess my question is, the discussion, I guess, over the next 2 days is really focused on cities. I think all of us are kind of urbanization folks. Historically, urbanization, rapid urbanization, as we're seeing across the continent, it's unfolded hand in hand with industrialization, right? And there's pros and cons with this. The pros are people tend to go into more formal jobs, you get wages, incomes and livelihoods increase. The cons in the context of this discussion is it tends to lead to increased emissions per capita. So I guess these are trade-offs, right? Obviously, we want industrialization, and it's a matter of maximizing the benefits of industrialization while trying to minimize the costs. And then I guess that combined with climate interventions are typically discussed in, there's mitigation and there's adaptation. And if we're talking about Africa, the emissions per capita are the lowest in the world. I think as a continent, they contribute something like 2 or 3% of global emissions. And unfortunately, they're in a place where they're going to have to still deal with the reality despite not contributing to it. So do we think, these are trade-offs, right? So do we think the conversation over the next 2 days and more broadly should be more focused on the latter, adaptation, than the former? Is it an either or? This is a murky question, but I would love your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then I think the gentleman here, this will be the last intervention we'll hear from the audience.
Yeah, the gentleman is Joe AKECH, former Nairobi mayor. I like what the the contribution that has been mentioned to us here. AU is playing a very big role in terms of getting all African countries together. There are certain areas where we have war going on. We have people having different ideas. What part will the city diplomacy come in to try and supplement the effort of the AU of unifying Africa to speak or to be in one, to speak in one language? When I say language, in terms of the development and so forth, because this is what the head of states are really fighting.
This is very important. When it comes to Kati's question, I'm not sure whether I understand it completely, but it was related to the climate sector, right? And I think what is important for the conference is that we will deal with different policy sectors. Obviously, climate is one of the key questions when it comes to city diplomacy, but I think we're also taking a deep dive into other areas, also the security question, migration, and the geopolitics of city diplomacy. Because what I think is interesting is to see also where cities and subnational entities can take over when state relations relations are actually in crisis. Which brings me to the last question: what is the role of AU also in fostering city diplomacy? And I think the question is also: is there a complementarity between city diplomacy and classical state diplomacy? Are states and national governments actually recognizing cities and subnational actors' roles in in international relations, or are they seeing them as competitors and actually blocking initiatives? So I think this is one of the questions we're also going to look at during the conference. I've been longer than 1 minute. Really sorry.
It's okay. So I think, thank you very much, Sina, for summing it up and responding to some of the issues that were raised. I also would like to give a chance to Kathy to respond and maybe share her thoughts from the more practical perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll try to be short as well. And I don't think I can answer all of them as well. But I think looking at the duplication of efforts, it's something that at C40 cities, we're very keen on cities being able to share best practices amongst each other, to really be able to look at what has been successful and how can they learn from each other in being able to ensure that their efforts are successful. And then looking at mainstreaming, he talked about mainstreaming of the SDGs, which is really important. I think that's something that at a city level, we need to start looking at climate action as something that is an add-on, to the usual, business that we do at the city level. And how can we mainstream some of these indicators into how we actually look at development? So I think those are really important considerations for cities to look at individually, and even as they share best practices across the region. The very difficult question on is it adaptation and mitigation, I don't think we can really pick. We're seeing, particularly in the Africa region, a lot of the catastrophes with flooding as well. City leaders don't have the, comfort to pick one or the other. We do have to plan for the hazards that we're seeing right now, and having a forward lens at looking at how we can ensure that we're protecting our future as well. And that goes back to financing, and cities really being able to advocate for financing to be able to deal with these challenges. Finally, as it relates to the AU, I think very important discussion for the region, and I would talk more about city-to-city diplomacy and seeing how cities, again, can share best practices. How can they be able to aggregate some of the projects that we're looking at in climate action and advocate for financing as a block? Like I mentioned earlier, cities are stronger when they work jointly as a network. And if they can be able to come together to advocate for their needs and deliver services to their citizens, that's very complementary to the work that's being done at a national level. And I don't think it's something that can be seen as a competition at all, but something that's very much needed. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. And I think it's quite clear there are quite a lot of issues that are emerging, and we were not here to answer all the questions. This is just an invitation for a conversation and a start of the conversation. So now I think you'll hear from more esteemed speakers, and then you will enjoy and engage in debate. So I want to thank the esteemed speakers that we had today, Sina and Kathy. I also would like to thank the audience for your participation. It was really great that early in the morning you're still engaged, and then I hope that you'll continue this momentum and you will continue engaging in this conference and have very fruitful and interesting debates and discussions. And then maybe you can arrive at some conclusions at the end, which would be great. So I thank you very much, and please enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you, our panelists. It's been a pleasure to have you. I like how you've triggered the conversation on city diplomacy and the richness in the discussion. So we'll move on to the next session. That's the opening of the conference, official opening. We'll kick off with Clelia Corret from Ifri. She is a historian and specialist of East Africa and Swahili Coast language. She has a PhD in contemporary history and has an award-winning thesis titled The Refunding of Swahili Polity in Witu. Welcome.
Good morning. So as you have here, I'm a specialist of Witu, who was a city, a town in the 19th century. So not especially what we are speaking today, but in the past. My name is Clélia Corrette. So I'm the director of Ifri Nairobi. Ifri Nairobi is the French Institute for Research in Africa. Which is specialized on social sciences and humanities. So I'm here to open the floor with my colleagues, and it's an honor for us to welcome all of you here today in Laikipia Road for this amazing conference on city diplomacy in Africa, which is part of the research program governing the urban transition in Africa, coordinated by Ifri. So Ifri is very glad to contribute to this very important event organized by Ifri, the United Nations Human Settlement Program, and United Cities and Local Governments in Africa. Welcome, everybody. Ifri and Ifri has a long tradition of working together through specific programs and research programs we have, and it is also a connection that we have with Dr. Sina Schlimmer, who has worked with Ifri since her PhD here in Kenya and Tanzania. So for me and for Ifri, it was very natural to welcome to host the conference because of these past connections. Just a small words about what Ifri is doing, because I can see some familiar faces here in the room, but maybe not all our friends are knowing about Ifri. So it's an institution which has started in 1977, who is dealing research in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, east of Congo, and who is taking care of all the disciplines of social sciences and humanities, which are history, geography, anthropology, political science, etc. We are dedicating to the production of knowledge and its dissemination by supporting research programs, supporting also fieldwork in East Africa, especially support to a young researcher here in East Africa. This is really important to support for the new researches. And we have also some publications, journals, and monographs that we are doing. So the goal also is to strengthen partnership between French or European institutions and East African institutions. So this is what we are doing today. So we are totally in the missions of Ifri. And so I just would like to thank you for being here and for this good talk we are going to have today and tomorrow. Feel at home, feel free to ask anything to us. I also would like to thank the British Institute in Eastern Africa. Thanks to them, we are allowed to use this fantastic room. And we have also technical assistance by Charles Moniki, so I also thank him. And so, yes, that's all. And so now let me welcome the next person who is going to take the mic. This is Dr. Alain Antil, the director of Ifri's Sub-Saharan African Center. So please, it's your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Alain Antil. I am the director of the Sub-Saharan Africa Center at the French Institute of International Relations. I first want to thank Clélia Corrette and the entire Ifri and British Institute team for hosting the conference. Ifri and Ifri are also cooperating on another research project, and it is a great pleasure to be here with them. Ifri is the main French and French-speaking think tank dealing with international relations. It has around 10 research teams, including the Sub-Saharan Africa Center. At the Sub-Saharan Africa Center, we have been working for 15 years on different aspects of politics and geopolitics in the region, peace and security and state formation, bilateral African policies, We also pay a lot of attention to the issue of urbanization in Africa. For us, this question is crucial for the future of the region. This is why Sina Schlimmer and the Sub-Sahara Africa Program Center have funded a research program on the governance of Africa's cities. The program deals with questions such as land management, mobility, new cities, and infrastructure financing. I have a problem with my tab. Okay. This program is carried out with the support of various partners, UN Habitat, OECD, Charter Cities Institute, Friedrich Schreiber Foundation, and some companies like AGES, CETEC, and Orange. Its aim is to combine the analysis of different types of actors through publication, but also conference in Paris, of course, and in Africa. And it is a great pleasure for me to attend our first conference in East Africa and Kenya. One of the aspects that we also want to address in this program is city diplomacy. This is even more relevant as we are a think tank working on international relations. International relations are the prerogative of the states, but the states are not the only actors in this relation. International institutions, global companies, NGOs, diaspora, religious organizations, but also local governments and cities obviously occupy aspects of international relations. Some of which will be addressed during these two days. I'm also grateful for our partners for this conference. Apart from the already mentioned Ifri, I obviously wanted to thank UN Habitat and the United Cities and local governments of Africa for this great partnership. Thank you. I now have the pleasure of handing over to Ramatukaso Die, who is the advisor for political affairs and international relations of the United Cities and local governments of Africa. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Esteemed delegates and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to welcome you to this important conference on city diplomacy in Africa. On behalf of United States and local governments of Africa and its Secretary General, Mr. Jean-Pierre Elombassi, I would like to thank Ifri and Sina for involving us in this conference on city diplomacy in Africa. We hope that this cooperation with the world of research will be strengthened and will lead to a better understanding of the challenges of city diplomacy from a local and African perspective. We welcome also the participation of UN Habitat through the Director of Africa Regional Office, my brother, Omar Silla. Please allow me to remind you that our two institutions have a special partnership to address the challenges of urban planning and the implementation of global agendas. In particular, the 2030 agenda and the African Union's 2063 agendas. We are also pleased to see this tripartite cooperation between Ifri, UN Habitat, and UCLG Africa on such an important subject. And beyond this conference, we hope that it will foreshadow a strengthened partnership around a program that will not only enable further research into city diplomacy, but will also serve as a framework for expressing renewed multilateralism in Africa around both South-South and North-South cooperation actions. As the umbrella organization representing local and regional authorities in Africa, United Cities and Local Governments of Africa has been involved in city diplomacy from a very early stage, organizing AfriCities Summit since 1998. From a geopolitical view point of view, the aim is for African towns and cities not only to build an international African entities, but also to project themselves into the international stage as meaningful players. From a geo-economic point of view, the AfriCities Summit aims to establish a new partnership for economic development at local level. The aim is to develop ways and means of bringing African cities into the field of economic competitiveness. This requires the formulation and implementation of city diplomacy focuses on economic influence and territorial development. The 9th summit in Kisumu was a manifestation of this, with a bifurcation in the approach through the recognition and legitimization of African local governments by the African Union, states and multilateral partners. City diplomacy in Africa, the role of municipal actors in shaping global policies and geopolitics is the theme that brings us together here and challenges us as UCLG Africa, as it allows us to look back on 20 years of action and advocacy to raise the voice and the path of the peoples and territories on Africa. Cities play a significant role in international relations, as they are key players in promoting peace, prosperity, and sustainable development on the global stage. In recent years, we have witnessed the increasing importance of cities as diplomatic actors, engaging in cross-border cooperation, exchanging best practices, and advocating for the interests of on the international stage. African cities are not exceptions, as they are the forefront of addressing pressing global challenges such as climate change, urbanization, and migration. City diplomacy in Africa presents a unique opportunity for municipal actors to influence global policies and geopolitics by leveraging their connection, resources, and innovative solutions to address complex global issues. By strengthening partnership and building consensus with other cities, governments, and international organizations, African cities can amplify their impact and contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous world. The academic community, in all its diversity, has a different view of the international action of cities from as a practitioner. Indeed, the term city diplomacy applied to various forms of international action undertaken by local authorities and local governments reflect a complex reality and recent change in the direction of action by African cities. At a time when politics and geoeconomics are intertwined, African local authorities, following on from state diplomacy, will have to equip themselves with the tools they need to achieve their international ambitions, since it has to be acknowledged and said that the international system was designed by and for Western, and as a result has led to a totally asymmetrical relations. The aim will be to rethink the concept in the light of new challenges, to measure its scope and impact in Africa, and to list the action and new players involved. We believe that there is value in both analyzing practice and setting standards. In other words, we need both researchers and activists if we are to make progress in the field of city diplomacy. We also invite researchers to consider the following questions. Thinking about the reconfiguration of relations between African cities and states to get out of the statist straitjacket of international relations. Secondly, how to increase the capacity for action of African cities at international level, to give them the means, legality, and legitimacy to play an active role in regulating international standards. Third, how can we consider decentralizing the management of international relations to create new complementary level of authority? These three objectives are part of a united strategy for positioning and shaping the influence of African cities on the global geostrategic stage. But at the same time, they require substantial financial researches, as there can be no strategy without research. I look forward to fruitful discussion and concrete outcomes that will shape the future of city diplomacy in Africa. Thank you. So I introduce now my brother Omar Silla.
Thank you, my sister Rahmatu. I think what is amazing this morning is that we are mostly Francophone gathered in this room. And we are most comfortable this morning being here, as we have been dominated for many years here in Kenya by English speaker. Thank you, Sina, for creating this opportunity. Take us back to our native language. Again, let me start by acknowledging some president of authority here, Mr. Raphael, representing the governor, Sakaja, of Nairobi, but also Alain, who traveled with Sina along from Paris to attend this meeting. My sister Rahmatu, who traveled 2 days from Morocco to get here, and that's one issue we need to discuss, because we are talking about Africa continental free trade. But if traveling from Morocco to Nairobi will take you 2 days, and there's something we need to think about when it's about city diplomacy as well, because what I'm delivering is more about reflection. It's not really a speech, because we know that the world is into crisis, many crises, environmental crisis, financial crisis, social crisis, because poverty is increasing, inequality is increasing, what we learned from the COVID-19. And we have seen a lot of gathering coming. And recently, the one we experienced here in Nairobi was the Africa Climate Summit. But the question we have been asking ourselves was, what was the level of recognition of the voice of local authorities on finding solutions to those issues? And still today, when we see participation of local government on those negotiations, is still marginal. And even shocking people, we say, oh, local government is there, which means it's not something normal for us to have local government associated to the search of a solution to those global issues, knowing that all those issues are happening at the local level. I mean, Katrina, when you introduced the panel discussion, I think you brought the trajectory of Africa, the rapid trend of urbanization we are seeing in Africa, which is one of the most rapidly urbanizing continent in the world. Today we are talking about 800 million people living in cities. By 2030, Africa will reach the urban transition. What does it mean? It means that more people living in cities than rural area. And today, how much challenge we are struggling? Informality, how many people live in informal settlement? 56% of urban population live in informal settlement, including Kenya, Nairobi. Same time now, we have the issue of access to basic services, water, sanitation, and without ignoring the youth bulk as we are experiencing in Africa. the young population we are seeing, and all coming to cities because of what? The climate crisis you mentioned, conflict in all Africa, Sahel region, Horn of Africa, as a particular hotspot in Africa, and all this are having impact on cities. And people are dreaming to have also a better life in cities, which means that accessing digital to this gadget for people, the conception is that the best way to get access to that is to come to the cities. So what's the role of local government? I come back to that because for me, we cannot find the solution without linking national and local government. And when we talk about local action and local problem, it's about looking who are there. And today we have opportunity in Africa. Those opportunities are devolution because many countries are going to decentralization, which means that transferring the power of decision and service delivery from national to local. But what skills those populations have? What skills those authorities have to be able to deliver on the services? I think Sina has mentioned some issues. Fiscal limitation, capacity limitation. How you want those local authorities to be meaningful and reactive to city diplomacy if they don't have the skills? That's why for me, this gathering is very important because it's an opportunity to reflect deeply on the trajectory of Africa. How do you want our cities to be? And who are the actors we need to engage on the cities' transformation? Because for us as UN Habitat, we are seeing an opportunity for Africa, for the transformation of Africa. You mentioned the African Union perspective because the Vision 2063 talk about transformation, give a very bold role to cities, local government, and institutions at the local level in terms of service delivery, in terms of governance, which is important, as we shouldn't ignore it, but also in terms of community participation. Today we have opportunity of fostering our cities, of engine of economic development, of growth, for reducing inequalities, for creating jobs and employment opportunity for everyone, for increasing fiscal decentralization. Yesterday, for example, we had a good discussion with the governor of Homo Bay, because I know Kenya is one of the most progressist now when it comes to devolution system. And the whole discussion we have been talking about yesterday is a fiscal decentralization system. Looking into the own source revenue system in Homo Bay, only 10% or 50%, 40% maximum has been tapped. All the rest is vanishing. Why? Because there's no policy, there's no institutional framework, there's corruption, issue of governance, but at the same time, no capacity for the city leaders. Which means that it's very important to think about capacity. I think that's what this city diplomacy is bringing, the skills, the capacity, the leverage, but also the connection necessary for this local leader to be a key players of transformation of our local level, but also engaging at the international level. Because today we have a lot to discuss, and Africa has to position himself. Kenya, that's the starting point of this discussion on the reform of the financial architecture, global architecture, which is normal, because when it comes to global architecture, the one who is suffering is the population in Kibera, the population as the cities, and how we can help them get better life and decreasing, the expense of life, I think is very important. For UN Habitat, I think this is very important, and I really thank Sina for initiating this conversation over the last 2 years. I know we were planning to have a very engaging conversation with diplomats in Kenya, Africa Group, and I want to acknowledge the presence of the representative of Nigeria. He was involved on this conversation, and that one action I will come back on my messaging. But most importantly for UN Habitat, I think it's timely. It's timely in the sense that we want to pitch this decentralization, this urbanization as an opportunity for transforming the life of people in Africa. That's why for us, we undertake many actions. First action, we have the initiative of Local 2030. UCLG Africa is part of it. This is hosted by Bilbao in Spain. The Local 2030 is more about localization of the SDG and make sure cities and municipalities are keeping record. Of course, we know the challenge we are facing because we know that we have been put back on achieving the goal of the SDGs. But what we can do to catch up a bit the delay and also help municipalities, local leaders, at least to accelerate the SDGs. And that's the whole purpose of Local 2030 agenda, an initiative which is about knowledge building, connecting city leaders, but at the same time capacity development. And on that, there's some declination in Africa because we is UNECA, UCLG Africa. 2 years we developed what we call the guideline on SDG localization in Africa, which has been implemented to inform the achievement of the SDGs. Another initiative for us is this climate summit. This summit for the future, which is very important. I think somebody mentioned it at the introduction phases. The Secretary General has established what we call advisory group on local government, because at least he acknowledged and recognized the importance of local government in achieving the goal of the SDGs. The purpose of this advisory group is to collect input from various levels of local government and city leaders for inputting in the aspect of the future that come from this summit of the future expected. So which means that we have opportunity as well to gather our engagement, our information, and see how we can influence. Rahmatu UCLG is very active on this local government advisory group. UN Habitat is very active. UCLG global, network is also active on that. That's an opportunity we can see. On the programmatic aspect, we have been working with many municipalities on local action on climate change, especially looking at adaptation and mitigation measures. And we have a program, for example, covering 4 countries in Southern Africa, Comoros, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Malawi, just to look at how best we can support municipalities of developing strategy, resilience strategy, but also of developing early warning mechanism. What is important on that is the network of cities we are bringing to connect each other and to learn from each other how to react on this climate change crisis, because you don't wait until the storm comes to start collaborating. It's now you can do it. And on the early warning system, I think that a lot has been done and being scaled up in many countries and cities. And this core of cities are speaking one voice now on the challenges they are facing, but at the same time on what they have learned from this intervention of UN Habitat in addressing the issue of climate change, but also on sharing with international forum and fora how to deal with climate change on those particular countries. We talk about city-to-city cooperation. Of course, this is the most traditional way of cooperation we are seeing. I mean, in the French system, we talk about the city decentralization system that I learned from my experience as well. But what is good is the knowledge sharing, but also connecting city to cities. I will talk about the South-South cooperation, which is quite a good approach. We just finalized one with the city of Zurich and city of Freetown, looking into urban regeneration. Is about just learning from Zurich how they dealt with all those issues and what are those good experiences they can bring in Africa, which is quite promising. Also, even with China, South-South cooperation with Shanghai University on water waste management, we are working with them and connecting with some cities in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and other countries. Another area for engagement for us, as well as the continental level, is very important, because the work we have been doing as UN Habitat over the last 3 years is to elevate this agenda of urbanization at the continental level, because we realized that this aspect was not well captured in the institutional structure of the African Union. And what we were missing is the political momentum we need. So now what we are working jointly between UN Habitat, UNDP, and African Union on a joint program on urban resilience for the continent. It's more about looking into multi-risk factor, because we cannot talk about climate change without connecting with conflict, displacement, migration, and vulnerability of communities. So we are looking into multi-factor risk approach to this initiative and supporting 30 cities on developing resilience strategy, but most importantly, leveraging innovative financing system, because that's where the problem is. Because all mayors now, when they meet them, first thing they talk about is how we can get finance. And they don't have capacity to leverage those green finance because they don't have capacity. They cannot develop bankable project, which means that the perspective of this engagement with the African Union is to bring private sector, financial development institution, and identify the development project, bankable project, to help them invest, but also allow communities and municipalities to gain profit from that. And those are some initiatives I can share with you. For me, the message I want to deliver before I finish my remarks. First of all, of course, we are in a universe of research, but how to move from research to action? I think that should be a follow-up action of this outcome of this conference. A lot have been said, a lot had been written, but how to take it on the ground for people to benefit? I have in front of me a former mayor. What is this need and how we can address practically? I think that's where the avenue of collaboration is. I discussed with Rahmatu our last conversation, I was telling her what I'm interested from this partnership is Ifri is going from research to action. How we can develop joint programs, because there's a need. And everywhere, of course, we cannot cover all the need. But what we can do to transform and help those city leaders to be well equipped for negotiation, but also to engage in the upcoming event, from COP, World Urban Forum, and others. The second point for messaging as well, let's look at the multi-level dimension of it as well, especially the multi-level governance aspect of it. Of course, most of the time we are talking about local government, but we cannot talk about local government without talking about central government. Example of Kenya, all decisions from local are blocked by central. Rahmatu can tell you the example of Dakar. When Dakar was negotiating the bond, everything was set. Last minute, central government blocked everything, and that was the failure of this 3 years negotiation in the city of Dakar. How to bring on board on this conversation central government and relevant institutions at the central level is fundamental, very important as well. Certainly for me on the messaging as well, let's see how we can give freedom to municipalities and also create condition of self-resilience of cities and city leaders. Because when we talk about city diplomacy, our mayors in Africa, they all think about traveling. It's not the purpose of that. The purpose of this is to create the condition for self-resilience and auto-management for them and create capacity for them to manage and put the country or the cities in the track of development. It's very important. So we shouldn't create, this dependence of that. And that's something I'm always struggling with my leaders as well. Every time we say, do you have money for travel? I say, no, do you need to travel only to go to France just to see how they do it? Why you have experience next to you? And those are elements which are important. And last point for me, moving forward, where do you want to go after this conference? What do you want to do after this conference? It is very important to have this forward-looking, and I think that we have quite critical and very important moment coming. First moment is the World Urban Forum happening in Africa, in Egypt, for the first, I think, 20 years after, it's coming back to Africa, after Kenya. This is an opportunity we have as well on bringing municipalities and leaders and others partners, C40, AKECH, and just expand the partnership. I think it's very important to look at this critical mass of actors working on the issues and how we can get together and really, amplify what we are doing. I know I approached, I think C40, I think it was 2 years back because I was so interested on the topic. I just say, what do you have in your drawer in terms of knowledge on the city diplomacy aspect? Second event, the first ever Africa Urban Forum, going to happen in Addis Ababa, 4 to 6 of September. First time we got the African Union, government of Ethiopia, technical agencies such as UCLG Africa, UN Habitat, UNCS coming together to organize the first forum at the higher level of the nation of Ethiopia, because we have the leadership of the Premier Minister. And the whole purpose of this forum is to chart the way forward for the urban agenda in Africa. Because we don't want to be seeing, things adopt. But what is the perspective that Africa wants to take advantage of this urban expansion we are seeing in terms of curbing climate change, in terms of creating opportunity for the youth, but also in terms of economic transformation. So what we are expecting from this is just what we call a roadmap toward addressing or transforming urbanization into a power in Africa. And it's the right moment for us to engage. Local government will have key role to play. Everybody has key role to play, what we can do on that. And lastly, of course, looking forward to COP in Azerbaijan, what needs to be done, because I think the whole discussion and negotiation on climate change, we are talking about carbon sequestration, we are talking about loss and damage as well, how to position local government and how to give them the skills of negotiation. And this will bring me to my first point. The skill required for these leaders to be on top of the game is very important. So those are some elements I want to share with you. Again, to thank Sina for initiating this good discussion, Rahmatu as well, with the collaboration we have UCLG Africa. Just to let you know, UN Habitat is on board on this conversation. As United Nations, we have our convening role, and we are ready to support and to go to the next step after this conference. Again, thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, next speaker. Oh. I was the last one. Oh. something. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kazungu Raphael. I work as an urban planner. I'm an economist as well as an environmental manager in Nairobi County. I welcome all of you to Nairobi and, of course, to this conference. And at that juncture, I now read the brief note that His Excellency the Governor speaks to you this morning. The Director, Ifri Nairobi, the Director, Ifri Sub-Saharan African Center, the Advisor for Political Affairs and International Relations, UCLG Africa, and the Director General, Office for Africa, UN Habitat, ladies and gentlemen. As the host governor, please allow me to welcome you to the City County of Nairobi, and specifically to the Conference on City Diplomacy in Africa. Beyond its hub status, Nairobi hosts the seat of national government, in addition to actors such as embassies, regional financial institutions, and private commercial entities with a global footprint. While the rapid urbanization presents profound opportunities for localizing sustainable development, it is also true that unprecedented challenges accrue from obtaining urbanization trend. To ameliorate such unprecedented challenges amidst quick morphing city dynamics, it is necessary to engage in multidimensional problem identification, rigorous policy analysis, and policy formulation in a format that is integrated and evidence-based. Global perspectives are welcome in this regard. May I also observe that the need to address challenges emanating from urbanization has occasioned the entry of multiple international development agencies in urban space. It is therefore incumbent upon city leadership to foster harmonization amongst initiatives by international development agencies towards forestalling intervention overlaps and poor resource utilizations. Ladies and gentlemen, Nairobi recently hosted high-level summits of the African Development Bank and African Union that give impetus to realization of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The success of the African Continental Free Trade Area is dependent on city-to-city cooperation. And this is especially true since major highways traverse major African cities. So it is cities that are depended upon to either operationalize and enable intra-continental flow or to hinder it. It is on this note that I invite sharing of experiences among cities and cross-pollination of policy solutions. Caution should, however, be exercised as to recognizing the context specificity of each city and peculiarity of development challenges obtaining in each city. Even as we do exchanges, we must be aware of the peculiarity of each city and the development challenges therein. I trust that this meeting will provide an additional forum for city exchanges and culminate in a framework of action that incorporates a performance monitoring arrangement. May I affirm the congregants of Nairobi's commitment and sustained participation in this initiative. Lastly, I encourage the delegates to take time and sample the wildlife, cultural, culinary, and civil aspects of the city and Kenya at large, alongside your attendance to this conference. With those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, I declare the conference open.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, our chief guest, for the opening. We'll proceed to a photo session and then lunch, and then we come back. For the photo session, we'll take it from the garden. It's just at the other end. So we proceed with the photo sessions.
Everyone, I hope you had a great lunch. Let me introduce the first session of this conference, Leveraging Diplomacy in Fast-Growing Cities, Actors and Partnership. So I'm going to call Winnie Mitula, professor, to be the chair of this panel.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting panel. It has Lorenzo, where is Lorenzo? Come over. It has Victory, Jaja, and it has former mayor, Joe AKECH. Take the podium. Over here. He's used to taking podium, so when I say podium, he'll run to the podium. Okay, thank you very much. I think the morning has been great in that a lot of key concepts have been raised for us to at least interact with, and they were really, really good speeches up front. I think some 2-3 key words. I think there was a bit of mention of decentralization. Again, I think there was mention of multi-level governance. And I think those two words are very critical to this discussion, because sometimes I do ask, when you talk about cities or municipalities or local governments, or let's say local governments, whether within them fall cities, metropolitan areas, regions, wherever. But at the end of the day, there is no center without the local. So sometimes this debate is not very viable when we want to question whether the local governments or cities should engage or not engage in international diplomacy, because it's one and the same thing. So to me, it's more of how do they engage and what kind of leveraging do they do and what do they bring to table, which are critical, I think, discussions that we are going to have. So in this team, we are going to be running this discussion, and we'll have about 5 questions or issues that we are going to engage with. The first 2 will be taken like in a collectivity, so that we first have Lorenzo going up, then Jaja will come, Victory will come after, and then we'll leave the politician last, because you don't take them up podium first. If you do, you might lose your, your space. So, and the whole idea why they'll come like that is because Lorenzo here is coming from academic perspective. He runs a city lab, a lot of knowledge on that area. Then when you get here to Victory, the Victory is actually a career diplomat. He'll tell us what that means, being a career diplomat, and probably understands better the concept of city diplomacy or diplomacy as it is than us. Then, of course, we have Joe, who actually had an experiential test of it all. He engaged with it. He's been a mayor. He kept sending people either into through twinning cities, name them.
City diplomacy, and Nairobi today is certainly one of them. So congratulations to Ifri, to UN Habitat, to UCLGA, and to IFRA for hosting us. So thank you so much. I have some PowerPoints. Yes. Perfect. Thank you so much. I have prepared a little presentation. The purpose of my initial speech is to provide some visibility on what are the main framework, the main trends of city diplomacy globally first, and then with a focus on what is the diplomacy of African cities, of course.
Is it out? You can't get it?
Perfect. Here it is.
Just pull back and come back.
Of course.
After you're done.
Can you put it full screen, please? Thank you. Yeah, you can.
So you have to control it from.
Yeah. You see there is on. It's on the top right corner. Can I do it? We can do duplicate, maybe. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. I will. Thank you so much. I think that's it. Perfect. Thank you for your patience. And well, a little word, first of all, about the City Diplomacy Lab. As Professor Mitula kindly mentioned, I direct this research institutions. We are part of this trend in academic institutions to engage in the big challenges of humanity. And our specific take is to engage in the local challenges, those global challenges that have primarily urban implications. And unfortunately, well, most of what humanity is facing today is hitting particularly hard cities and deepening cleavages, of course, within and across cities. So we believe that by working together, cities have a lot of potential to improve the response and eventually the sustainability and well-being of people all over the world. A little definition by city diplomacy. I'll go very fast because this was provided before. City diplomacy, as Sina correctly mentioned, well, there are so many definitions. And in a nutshell, I consider it to be this diplomatic action, fully diplomatic action by local authorities, as Professor Mitula said, this includes, of course, cities, that are able to advance their priorities, so it's very much aligned with the specificities of a place, but also address those challenges that I mentioned in partnership with their peers, other local authorities, other cities, all across the world, as well as with other actors, as it was said, such as international institutions, multilateral development banks, national development agencies, NGOs, and so on. And a big question, and that I often receive by my colleagues teaching and researching about international relations, first question is, why do you call it diplomacy? This is not diplomacy. Diplomacy is only what nations do. And I think we can identify that when we look through the main dimensions of what acting diplomatically means, we can see a very strong parallel between the two. First of all, there are the ambassadorial duties to represent a territory abroad with the perspective of promoting it. And this is what a leader, local leader, is doing, they are doing that, and so they are somehow the city diplomat in chief, or somehow the ambassador of the city. It's very similar. They have a dialogue with other cities. They identify a number of shared urban challenges, and they go to answer them through a number of activities that are designed and implemented jointly. There is a component of knowledge that was very much highlighted before by Mr. Silla, and the capacity comes from places sometimes close to you, but sometimes thousands of kilometers away, because we are all an urban species right now. We are facing similar challenges, and the solution can come from everywhere. I'm sure there is always a good solution that can be adopted and adapted. And finally, national and international advocacy. This is also going to conferences, going to meetings. There is always more and more space for cities, thanks to the forward-thinking approach of many international organizations, UN Habitat, the United Nations in general, UN regional commissions, the African Union, European Union, and Mercosur, and so on. So everywhere in the world there is this recognition that you want to have a big impact on the life of people. You need the engagement of cities, and they receive a space to voice their opinion about that. And in terms of impact, concrete impact, well, this encompasses everything that we define as quality of life, as well-being. Of course, this is very diverse, and this could take probably 2 hours to go through every single element. Just let me give you some examples. Cultural and creativity, that is something we say it's everywhere in city diplomacy, basically, because it's nice. So you have a nice concert, a nice artist display, and so on. But it's not only to complement what is done, it's also a powerful tool for sustainable development. And this has been powered by many city networks, including UCLGA, UNESCO Creative Cities Network, and so on. Equity and inclusion, big challenges for cities everywhere. Everywhere, with all geographies, all sizes, and this includes a strong accent on gender equity that is seeing the municipal leadership emerge in this framework. Research and technology, this is a smart city, or as I say, smart city diplomacy, better said. Economic growth and attractivity, now this whole understanding that cities can play a fundamental role in making the local economy more dynamic. It's a powerful tool. This also goes along with the branding approach, branding a place branding, that starts from the specificities of the place. It's not a copy-paste technique. It's just to say, what are you doing that can be valuable for everywhere in the world, and you focus on that. Environmental and climate change, really no need to discuss this further. Cities, they realize they have responsibilities, and they have a very important role to play. They are bringing solutions to the table, impactful solutions, of course, not that this can substitute fully the global effort that is required, but there is a substantial leadership from cities and local governments. Peace and reconciliation, that's my personal focus of expertise. Cities are unfortunately the place where most violence takes place today. We moved from the battlefield to the herbicide, unfortunately, and this means most of victims are civilians. This is a global trend over the last few decades, and you can see a leadership of mayors in that as well, collective leadership. And finally, international solidarity that encompasses everything from health to emergencies, such as natural disaster, to a more structured technical cooperation to advance together. In terms of tools, this also parallels very much what traditional diplomacies, national diplomacy does. It's divided into bilateral, multilateral. Both cases you can have projects and events, but bilateral probably remains the most famous, as was mentioned by Sina before. Well, sister city agreement, using an American term, or twinning of cities, or city twinnings. This is more global. It's a way for two cities to marry each other somehow, become a permanent partner. And this is what is still most famous when you speak generally of what city diplomacy can do. But personally, I believe that the biggest trend is with city networks, this capacity of cities to join forces on a broader level across different countries, regionally or globally. And we can see how this is a crowded place for African city diplomacy, of course. There are preconditions city diplomacy. I don't want to sound like, okay, you go there, all the results are easily achievable. No, you have to prepare the territory, you have to prepare the city, the governance to make sure this works. This means, of course, something that does not belong into the sphere of choice of local governments. You have to step back and understand that the legal framework at the national level in terms of political independence and fiscal powers are absolutely key to allow for a productive city diplomacy. Unless you have this, you can at best have what I call proxy foreign policy, when the state, the national government decide what the city does, but it's just a proxy for foreign policy. Local participation of residents and local actors through city diplomacy is participatory. This way you make sure you on one side adapt it to the specificities of the place, and on the other you also ignite its potential, you kickstart it through the energies that you have on the city. Political priority, the mayor or the local leader has really to make it a priority that encompasses all the levels of government. Unless this is a transversal priority, it won't work. And I've seen the frustration of city diplomats when this is only one sector, they do their thing, and all the others they do another. No, it should be an enabler for all the sectors. And finally, human resources, a topic that was presented by Mr. Silla, and it's a big challenge, as we will see, because you need those city diplomats. It's very difficult to be capable of connecting local to global, especially because there is so little availability of training and teaching opportunities for that. But what you get once you have all of this, you have these three resources. So you are bringing something to the city, something that can also be communicated with the general population to justify why you're doing so. The most famous resource that it is gained is certainly the technical resource, the most developed. You get the tools from your peers, from jointly working with them, to better do what a local government is supposed to do. You will be more efficient, more impactful, you can reduce the costs, engage more with the population, and basically doing better what you want to do. Second, most famous, financial resources. This is very important. There are opportunities from multilateral development banks, national development agencies, big charities, NGOs. But of course, you need to get to them. You need to know how to apply for them. There is an example. The colleague from C40 probably knows much better than me the Global Cities Fund for Migrants and Refugees, which is co-organized by C40 and the Mayor's Migration Council. This providing funding up to $200,000, if I'm not mistaken, for cities that want to target those two challenges jointly. Well, technical resources, an example I forgot to mention is the African Smart Town Network. It's empowering, it has been empowering 11 African cities to develop their own path to digital transformation, which is productive for the specificities of the place. And finally, political resources. It's the voice of those mayors that have want to contribute, want to create the new vision for the common challenges. And this is done in many places. I personally collaborated to the COP of cities that took place in the summer 2022 in July 2022 in Abidjan, Ifri cities. Well, this was of course mentioned already by Dr. So, and Africa Urban Forum that was also mentioned and will take place later this year in Addis Ababa. So where are we going? Where are we going? Basically, there is new levels that have been added through the years to what city diplomacy can do and supposed to do. We started with solidarity. After the Second World War, meaning we can work together, we can support those in particular need. There was also a reconciliation component, both between former enemies of the Second World War, but also between former colonizing and colonized countries. So somehow it's a connector, a peaceful connector that emerged through solidarity. Then in the 90s, the moment, the peak of the globalization, economic globalization, cities started to realize they can really attract investment. That's a topic that was mentioned before, but also support the export of what the city does. So the mayor became also sort of an entrepreneur. In the 50s, and we are very much here still, it's the idea of having partnerships rather than donor-recipient relationship, where everyone can bring something highly valuable on the table, and it's by creating this collective intelligence that city diplomacy really brings results. And finally, we have those two levels, multi-level governance. So I'm very happy we have Dr. Jaja with us, because it's so important to connect the different levels of diplomacy to make sure that you expand the possibilities of impact. And finally, next future, that's a long dreamt dream of cities, to have the famous seat at the global table, meaning when we will decide what will be the future of humanity, cities should be fully part of the conversation. So what is happening in Africa regarding all of that? Well, Africa is really a protagonist of this evolution in many, many ways. And of course, I don't have the time to go through bilateral relationships, because this would take ages. But let me just show you some example of what collectively African cities have been doing among them and with foreign partners. So first of all, well, UCLG Africa, no need to introduction. For that, all multi-purpose network that supports cities in everything city and local government do. You have Cities Alliance, which is a technical project piloted by the United Nations to support improvement of living in informal settlements. You have a lot of happening in the climate sector with AKECH Africa, the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, which are the regional dimension of global movement. I mentioned gender, Refela. How many of you know Refela? Show of hands. Refela is very important. Google it. It's the network of female elected leaders of Africa. And it's not only about promoting equality in cities, which is priority, of course, but also promoting a new generation of female leaders. And there is a mentorship component from female leader to aspiring female leader that is really enabling. You have cultural linguistic networks, such as this is the logo of Union of Arab Maghreb, that has its own city network. The Commonwealth Local Government Forum, that has both Kenyan cities and the Kenyan government as a member, together with all the other. Nigeria is one of them. I worked with Lagos in this capacity. IMF is a French-speaking network of mayors. UCLA is a Portuguese-speaking networks. You have external actors that play an important partnership role with African cities, such as Platforma. It's a pan-European network. You have Connective Cities from Germany, ANCI from Italy, Cité Unie France from France, VNG from the Netherlands, ICLD from Sweden. And then, of course, you have a number of national networks that see internationalization as a priority. And I mentioned here SALGA and South African Cities Network, both from South Africa, among many other, and I mentioned them just because I had the pleasure of working with them in the past. So, and I'm closing, I don't want to take too much time from the debate that I think is the most important part. We can see that there is an emerging number of priorities, and most of them they've already been mentioned, in fact, in African cities. So climate change, unfortunately, has the impact where it's not really caused. It's very unjust, of course, as we mentioned, that African cities are paying something that was caused by people elsewhere. Nevertheless, this is the fact, so cities are acting, and this is definitely a priority, especially because it deepens the inequities that are already present. Regional integration grew the potential, and that's so nice to see that the African Union is committed to see cities as an opportunity to deepen this regional South-South cooperation for peace and economic development. Just transition. I've worked so much with African cities on this topic, energy, health, growth, and employment in particular, with an important focus on youth. And finally, capacity, the topic we discussed before, the need for skilled officials that can scale up the activity of local governments. But of course, challenges. Territorial divide, this is something not really only African, that's pretty much how city diplomacy is happening now. We all know that we have big cities like Nairobi, London, New York, or Tokyo that are extremely active. They are recognized as actors on the international stage, but sometimes the more global cities, some cities around, become, the less connected many other smaller sized cities are. And this is a pity. This is a territorial fracture that can be solved once we realize that city diplomacy should be inclusive, and it's actually an opportunity for joint advancements. Duplications and overlaps, already mentioned, so I won't spend much time on that, but this is also linked to the first topic. So if you take a map of where city diplomacy partnership are bringing fruits, you will mainly see big cities and capitals in particular, everywhere in Africa and also everywhere in the world. Partnering across language areas. This was a big challenge in the past. Now it's getting smaller and smaller, but it's an opportunity that has to be fully disclosed. You know, with French speaking, Portuguese speaking, Arab speaking, English speaking, Africa, once they realize the opportunities that comes from bringing together and the results are already there to show it, it's a big opportunity. And finally, last but not least, proxy foreign policy. I mentioned this already. This is where you have a foreign government that pilots its own cities with the goals of using them as a proxy for their objective. Not necessarily those objectives are the objective of their own cities, and when they're not, it's probably not the objective of the partner cities. So you have to be able to understand what is really piloting, what is behind this city diplomacy. And by the way, this happens with democratic and non-democratic countries alike. It's only that in democratic countries, it's less easy for the government to do it, but they try. Don't worry, they also try to do it. Well, that's my final slide. Key determinants of city diplomacy future in Africa. Well, first encouraging topics is this is expanding. It's expanding, so this territorial divide is being reduced. You have cities of different size. We have a big component that AFRICITE last year showed, a big component of mid-sized cities that are more and more active because they realize the importance they can play and the results they can draw. And governance and human resources represent a little bit the challenge for the future. So governance, we can see that if we have a general continental view on what Africa is experiencing, there is a trend in decentralization, but it's more political than fiscal. So once you have new capacities, you also need new possibilities to implement. This is a process ongoing. Hopefully will be concluded in the coming years. And human resources, once again, we need a new generation of city diplomats connecting local to global. And this is something where I believe research centers and university can play an important role in being a partner in this reinforcement of capacities. Just leave you with some resources. The South African Cities Network have prepared two wonderful papers, actually edited books on city diplomacy. If you're interested in setting up the whole efficient city diplomacy unit in your city, I wrote the book for it. And then I have my students that publish weekly episodes on city networks. This is the City Diplomacy Student Podcast. You can listen to it on the go and learn what are the opportunities in all the frameworks from organizing events to gender to digital transition, transportation, and so on. So that's it. Thank you so much.
After that wonderful, wonderful overview of what we are doing, and I think keep your notes and engagement. It's been a very interesting, overview of the entire, the concept, the activities, the actors, and I'm sure you are waiting to engage with this. But in the interim, let's hear the professional diplomat now, the real diplomat.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to first start, and permit me to exercise some of my French. J'aimerais remercier l'Institut français de recherche en Afrique et l'Institut français de relations internationales et tous les organisateurs de cet bon événement si pertinent à notre continent, à moi aussi. Okay, now back to English. Thanks for all to all the organizers. This is a very, very important event, and I want to thank Lorenzo for the overview. Thanks as well to our chair. But if you want to do everything, everywhere, to affect everybody, you do diplomacy. So rightly so, this concept is very malleable. And as Lorenzo mentioned, we have cultural diplomacy, economic diplomacy, art diplomacy. It's a malleable concept. But its application and its operations are very delicate. How do we marry malleability with delicateness? Having said all this, does this imply that we can't have city diplomats or we can't have city diplomacy? Like I said, it's an evolving discussion, but these are questions we would share more insight upon. And to wrap up, looking at time, in diplomacy, like we said earlier, you have the latitude to do basically everything, from environment to climate to weapons, and negotiations, peace and conflict. And in this space, we certainly are able to engage the aspirations of cities. But how do we engage it? I have a view, and maybe we can discuss it further. We can either engage cities as a theme of diplomacy, or we engage cities as actors in diplomacy. I would do a caveat. Cities as actors in diplomacy will be difficult. We've come 6,000 years and we've been only able to have 80 years of peace. We don't want to model the waters as at yet. So, okay. This is a very late disclaimer. Everything I'm saying it as Dr. Victory Jaja myself, not as my government. So don't say Nigeria has said this. This is my personal view. So we need to be careful not to muddy the waters, but to build on what we already have. So cities as actors or cities as a theme in diplomacy. But I have a middle ground which I might propose, which is the possibility to have cities as theme actors. Because we are able to engage all things in diplomacy. So we can piggyback on the diplomatic arrangements and bring in the needs and aspirations of cities. Of course, we have the variety of actors, but we use the already working and existing paraphernalia of diplomacy. I look forward to an interesting conversation. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaja. Thank you very much. I think this is a debate, and as we were invited, we were told it's a debate, and you can really see how the debates are coming out. Jaja is leaving us with a debate of, should we handle them just as themes, or should we handle them as actors, or should we handle them as theme actors? Whatever that means, we'll come back to that. Let's now hear the ex-mayor take the podium. He can't talk sitting. Mayors don't talk sitting.
I knew if you would have said no, I would have come anyway. That's the problem with politicians, I tell you. First, I want to to say thank you, Pamela Prof. I've known you for years. We've been together. And I've always admired the good work that you've been doing. And also want to say thank you to my colleague, the UCLG. Really, Madam, thank you. And I always say, when we won the Afri City, that was through the courtesy of your organization. And the pronouncement was made in Johannesburg. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Oh, okay. The pronouncement of Nairobi getting the being given the opportunity to host was done in South Africa, and Durban. And as I was waiting, because I had to make a presentation before my minister, and we had the entire lot, the entire government was with me. And the mistake I did was I waited for them to give us the final word. But at least, unfortunately, I went a little bit of a sleep. I kind of nodded, you know. And the only thing I had was Kenya. And I stood up like a crazy guy. I said, wow, wow, wow. Mr. said, man, what the hell is going on? And they're only talking about Kenyan security. So I want to say thank you. And also the second Afri City was also made possible through you in Kisumu. And I must commend the governor and his people for the good work that they did. I would come back the other way around as to what are some of the obstacles in the city experiencing in terms of the city diplomacy. But I also want to say for my two colleagues, that was very good presentation, and really I've learned quite a lot. Some of the obstacles that we went through, and which is still on, one, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is the political instability. That is one thing that really we have to focus on and see how we can, because that in one way or the other also contribute to people who wants to come and invest in the country, and if there's no stability, then of course we have a problem. The other one is the corruption part of it, which again is very, very important, and we have to be very open. And I'm very happy with the young people. I was having a meeting with them today, and my goodness, looks like the future is for these young people, because I brought in my issue, and they said, the young people, this is the way we're thinking, and I really wish you the very best. The other one is the adequate infrastructure, which of course has also contributed quite a lot, and then the economic challenges, security concern, regulatory and policy barriers, and social and cultural barriers. And the other one is the environmental challenges, limited skilled workforce, limited financial resources, and I believe most of my colleagues have spoken about the financial part of it. And addressing this obstacle will require a concerted effort from both the local government and the international community to also create some kind of a conducive environment for collaboration. This in itself is something which I think is very, very important. The other one is, in your perspective, what is Nairobi City niche at global stage? Who is Nairobi viewed at the global stage? How does this conflict or relate with Kenya's global brand? Again, I'll just touch base, very few. One of them is the International Organization Hub, which I think is also very important. The other one, like I mentioned earlier, is the Technology and Innovation Center. And I must give a very good appreciation to Humphrey in his SNI organization that were coming up with various sites, of course, through the support of the governor, and also through the initiative of the Habitat. And again, all those people have contributed. The other one is the regional business trade hubs. And for information, I did something many, many years ago, about 5 years ago. I did not know what it was really city diplomacy, but we went and created what we call Kenya-Ethiopia Friendship Association. This was people-to-people diplomacy, but when it's supplementing the government bilateral, but of course it's together with the knowledge of the government. And what we have done so far is we have initiated various exchange programs between Kenya and Ethiopia. Recently, we signed an MOU with Ethiopia University Aviation to try and help the Kenyans from this part of the world who may want to go for aviation training. We are also working on an exchange program on education between the universities of Addis Ababa and our various institutions here. Again, I believe that is people to people, but where the government will come in, then definitely we communicate with the government. The other one is the global perception of Nairobi. One is, I'm very happy with the message of the governor this morning. Nairobi is a dynamic and a growing city, which we're very proud of, and I think Nairobi is the only city where the lion will come out in South Sea, walk around, and people look at him, and of course they won't even harm you, but that's part of the attraction that we have. And then we have the environmental leadership, and then we also have the challenge of by infrastructure and governance issue. And then the other one, I'm just going through so at least some of the highlights, and then the other one is the relationship with Kenya Global Brand. Kenya Global Brand is multifaceted, characterized by rich culture, heritage, and natural beauty, and so forth. And then the alignment is also part of the area that we're also looking at it. Conflict is also a very, very important issue, because once you have a conflict, then within the neighbor, within the country, or within the region, then of course that also contributes quite a lot into what we're discussing today. Harmonizing Nairobi needs with Kenya brand. One is we want to see the improvement of the infrastructure, enhancing governance and transparency, promoting sustainable development, fostering talent development, which is very, very important, particularly among the young people, showcasing of the things that we have done, highlight some of the important things that we have done both on the national and international based collaboration. And then the other one which I thought I should also touch in on is our perspective, what are the crucial measures a city can put in place to enhance its city diplomacy campaign. And again, I mentioned earlier is the establishment of a dedicated city diplomacy office, and I believe this will be a very good message for the county of Nairobi, because that is where the action will take place in terms of using all the facilities that we have and promoting city to city between Africa or within the Africa or with other African countries, other European countries. And then the other one is to develop strategic partnership, which I think is equally very, very important. And then the other one is promote the economic diplomacy. And right now what we have done ourselves under that auspices of the Kenya-Ethiopia Friendship Association, we were sitting down with the Ethiopian government or the Ethiopian Minister for Trade a couple of months ago. Again, not as a government, but on people to people. And they were very happy indeed and said, Mr. AKECH, yes, we'd like to initiate this. But of course, when we reach to that area, then of course the government comes in. So that's one of the things that I think will also promote the theme of today. And this is also on the trade mission, which of course we have just mentioned. Investment forum, which is also very, very important. And then the scholarship programs, again, I'd like to mention to you, we're working on a partial scholarship for Kenyan students. We're touching Ethiopia because we want to go beyond Ethiopia, because we're also looking at Ghana. We're also looking at Egypt. We're also looking at Senegal. Isn't that a diplomacy? I think it is, in terms of trying to give opportunity to young people to also work very close with other countries, with other cities, in terms of promoting their culture, in terms of promoting their heritage, in terms of promoting the education and so forth. So those are some of the focus issues that we are coming up with. The other one is focus on sustainability and resilience. Climate change, of course, is very, very important. And then the other one is engage the private sector and the public-private partnership. And what my friends have said here, I think it's very, very important. And then, of course, in the council, we come up with a business council to try and also promote that intercity diplomacy. The other one is the improving infrastructure, connectivity, in terms of touching on the transport and communication, digital infrastructure, and I believe our president is talking a lot about this on the digital issue, with due respect. The other one is the enhanced public diplomacy and communication, which again is very, very important, touching on the media engagement, transparency and communication. And then the other one is build inclusive and diverse community. Inclusivity, again, this is what we were briefed this morning. Diaspora also plays a very, very big part. And then monitor and evaluate. And then the last is the implementation of the following: leadership commitment, capacity building, sustained funding. So once these things have been done, definitely that will be one way of us really trying to come up with encouraging the city diplomacy. In our own way, what we have done is we have communicated with various organizations, particularly when I was the mayor. We had the opportunity of creating exchange programs with cities like in the United States, cities in other parts of Africa, having inter-exchange program. And right now we are trying to promote our culture between Kenya and other countries like Ethiopia. Sports plays a very big part because those are the areas where you find the young people coming up. The talents is also very important among the young people. So those are the areas that we're looking into in terms of making sure that we sustain this city diplomacy. We are all doing city diplomacy in one way or the other, because even if you're talking to your neighbor from Ethiopia, your neighbor from England, that is an indirect way of city diplomacy, because he must have come from a city and he's talking to a city mayor. And that in itself is one of the best way of us to try and promote this city diplomacy. I have been a mayor for quite some time, and one of the things that really made me very happy, and I want to give compliments to Habitat, is when we came up with this street family. And I believe street family are almost everywhere in other parts of the world, and particularly in Africa. And what we did was work very closely with the government, with the international community like Habitat. And we had the opportunity of sending over 3,500 young people over the age of 18 to National Youth Service, of which some of them now are having very big positions. And then, of course, those who are below the 18, we took them to schools. And you won't believe it, most of them are having very good, they've graduated and they've really benefited from what we're doing. So to us, I think city diplomacy is you. And you have to make that initiative. You have to communicate with other people concerned, with other community, with other city, because city to city is the most important thing. And I think if we don't have this city-city kind of collaboration and connecting with one another, it becomes very difficult for us to really promote and propagate whatever the activities that we have. So I am very happy with the idea that you came up with on a city-to-city diplomacy, and I want to say thank you, and maybe we'll want to welcome you to Nairobi, and I'm sure the mayor did that. So mine is to say thank you. My brothers talk in French, I'll speak in Kiswahili. Thank you very much indeed. In other words, I'm saying thank you. And when you have the time, like what the governor said this morning, those who are not from Kenya, please take time, kidogo, go and see what we have in the wildlife, in Masai Mara and whatever. And that will really give you the idea of how we are really managing our own city here. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much, Joe. I just want to pick up these two, the scholar and the diplomat, 1 second before we go to the next issue that we'll handle. And Jaja has argued very well that the way he sees it, we need to see city diplomacy more as actors or theme. And being in a city lab, I think you have some insights on this. You need to give us your side of it from the knowledge perspective.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to say I agree with Dr. Jaja, because before nations even existed, cities existed. And if we look, for example, at what happened in the Greek city-state situation, or the Italian signorie, the medieval cities, that, by the way, were in a multi-layered institutional situation, granting them similar extent of freedom that we can find in some places right now. Regretfully, and to be sincere, the relationship between the cities were not that peaceful. There are beautiful pages of history written by Greek historians, and they are mostly about wars. And this is not to say, of course, that cities are inherently evil, not at all, not at all. But what is evil is, unfortunately, human evil happens when you have the possibility to impose your will to other population. When you have the possibility through economic, political, or military powers to impose your will, unfortunately, this is how humanity is done, this will happen. So what happens now? Who has this power right now? Only nations. Nations have the monopoly of armed violence, at least in terms of legal framework. Of course, we all know that we have international criminality and cross-boarding violent groups, terrorism, and so on. But legally speaking, only nations have this monopoly. What leaves these cities? So cities have no ways to impose their will. And so they became inherently peaceful. Inherently peaceful because when they want something, they can only do one thing. They can only collaborate. And this is why I see very interesting the collaboration between the national level and the the city level, because you need the power, you need the overarching authority to do something, including to defend yourself from external attacks. But it's interesting when you fuel the global conversation with the voice of cities. I'm not sure that most of the conflicts that we observe across the continents all over the world would still be happening if we had given real voice to mayors and asked them, do you want to go to war? Are you interested in this? Do you see any outcome, positive outcome from that? So my idea is to have a sort of a inclusive multilateralism, which, by the way, is the term which is used by Secretary General Guterres. A more inclusive multilateralism means not substituting the nations, absolutely not, but adding the voice of cities to global conversations.
Thank you very much for that explanation and elaboration. We just want to link exactly what you are saying with the next topic, which in your presentation earlier, the first presentation, you showed us the crowded context of these city diplomacy entities across Africa, probably. So what I would want the panel to share with us is what's the nature of this, crowdedness? I mean, if we were to look at the South-South context, how is the dynamics? Is it that cities are partnering with South-South collaborators, or is it a North-South? And what kind of dynamics are embedded there? What is the mutual relationships in that kind of engagement? And I want to start with Jaja, in terms of just trying to unearth these relationships. Because when we see the array that was presented by Lorenz, you remember there were so many logos there, so many, which shows that we are very, very active in city diplomacy. But what is this nature? Are there power dynamics in it? What is a mutual relationship? How are they triggered? Who prompts who? And we heard about lack of resources, there are some challenges that were again highlighted. How are those overcome in those relationships?
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting question. And I'll begin again, thank Lorenzo for giving us that picture. So we saw a lot of activities going on at the level of city diplomacy. One cannot quite deny that some of those partnerships would have some sort of desire to influence or another. And again, whoever pays the piper will dictate the tune. How are cities able to actually fashion out an agenda for themselves? For instance, cities in the global south, are they effectively able to design an agenda to say, we're setting an agenda, this is what we in the global south desire? Do they have the resources to pursue that agenda? Or are they grappling with some of the lesser challenges of development? So will they eventually be capable? It's quite a challenge. And of course, it will have its coloration on the sort of relationship that is built. Either it's done covertly or overtly. There must be some coloration in that regard. We can't deny that, and that's why it will be valuable to have a proper understanding of how cities will engage in diplomacy. I must agree with you that when we have more voices, say of mayors, we would, dispense of all these challenges we have, most of these challenges we're having, because they are the ones feeling the brunt. No mayor will say, yes, let's bomb that beautiful city, knowing that, oh, that is something that his fellow mayor, had spent some time doing. But how do we come back and give cities the real power in this diplomacy? How do we give them the ability to shape the agenda? That's why it is possible we consider them as theme actors. Within a national space, they are able to define, for us, for the cities let's say, for the cities in Senegal, these are our priorities. And we relate those priorities with the national government. And we relate those priorities as themes when we engage with organizations like UCLG. But when we have a plurality of programs, it's a bit difficult for cities to properly engage. And there must be some sort of power dynamic there, or here or there. I look forward to the panel. Again, one of the first moderators mentioned that one of the most interesting panels will be the geopolitical one. Unfortunately, ours is not as interesting, but we look forward to to that panel. I think they would have more to say about the power dynamics that will be inherent in such arrangements. Some cities will desire to have more access to electricity. Some other cities' desire would be ability to control migration. How do these two cities discuss? That's why we still maintain there must be some sort of middle moderation, which can be done at the level of the national governments. Thank you.
We'll have the mayor.
Yeah,
okay. I want to have you last.
Thank you very much. I really agree with what Dr. Jaja just said, and allow me to fully exploit the independence of not representing any institution and addressing the capacity issue in Africa, and highlight how sometimes, many cities are extremely capable of innovating and exploring new themes and teaching this innovation across the world. There are many African cities who are leaders in all the sectors that we have seen. And they're really city diplomacy superstars from all over the continent that are invited the world over, and they inspire population the world over. But if there is maybe less than hoped for in terms of capacity to do so, I have to say that there is a big responsibility of European cities, very sincerely. European cities, you remember the evolution that I showed you. So many remain at the first level. So the relationship with African cities is that of solidarity. So we know what's better for them. Let's give them the tools, and they will be happy. Of course, this is their heart is in the right place. So they observe that there is specific needs. But this is very little participatory. That's the issue. in reality, you want to find a solution. First thing is to ask the people, because most frequently the solution is already there. It's already there. People already know what they need. They have the capacity, they have the vision, they have the talents. But unfortunately, there has been this sort of paternalistic approach from many cities that have means and the heart at the right place, and so they're negatively impacting the capacity of many cities in Africa and the rest of the global South to be artists, actors of their own future. So I think that the global reflection on this North-South relationship is needed, and this is why it's so interesting to observe at the South-South relationship, because this is the importance of local production of innovation is much more clear in the South-South. Regarding the how to give voice to cities in global shaping the new agendas, well, that's it's an issue of integrating cities, which is very complex. In fact, I would like to salute the leadership of the United Nations in that, because they have been creating fora where cities are asked to express their visibility, their vision for the future in many topics. For example, there is something called the Forum of Mayors happening every year in Geneva, at the UN in Geneva, which is a mainly SDG targeted approach. So mayors from all over the world, they come there and they present what are the final communique of this Forum of Mayors is discussed by the interministerial meeting on urban development happening the day after. So there is really a good connection of this voice when the ministers have to discuss it. Then they can decide what they have, of course, what they prefer. But the topic is on the agenda.
Thank you. Let's give it to Joe.
Yes.
Joe, let's give it
Mine is just brief. If you remember Professor Kenya and Tanzania, Uganda, we used to have East African Community, which we have now anyway. And it's moving on very well. During those days, East African Community was kind of regionalized. And you find whatever they classified, the kind of the business opportunity, and even the issue of the particular infrastructure, particular ministry. You'll find that the Ministry of Labor, the ministry of a particular ministry was based in Tanzania, and then maybe another ministry was based in Uganda, and so forth. But they were doing more or less the same thing. To me, that was one of the best way of really trying to coordinate the two cities. And I agree with you that the mayors should play a very big part. And UCLG will, I will really request the former mayors, because we also have an organization called the former mayors. When we have the Ifri city here, we have almost 10,000 mayors from all over the world. These are the retirees who can still come back and utilize whatever the talents that they have, their connectivities and so forth. So the bottom line is the people themselves to diagnose exactly what they want. You have to have public participation, regional participation. Come up with an agenda that you think will be of importance to your particular region. If it's a communication, let it come from let it come from Tanzania. Why are we having that communication? Right now, we want to have my sisters coming all the way from Morocco. Takes about 2 days. I mean, in Africa, we can do the same thing. So these are the kind of the things that we in Africa should really start talking about. How do we develop the communication which will be much more easier in terms of trade, in terms of tourism, in terms of even people exchanging ideas? So I agree, mayors plays a very big part. Please involve them, and even the government would be more than happy to really utilize some of the wisdom that we have. And I agree with my colleague in terms of having the people to people being involved through regional basis, because through region you can hear the concern and the wishes of the people from each and every corner of the region that they are representing.
Thank you very much. It's like time is really running out. I want to bring it back to the plenary and get some few observations and or questions. One is right there. One next one, where is up there, back at the back. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. Just pass it over. And make them brief, observations or questions, make them brief.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Lorenzo, for you've actually unpacked for us this concept of city-to-city diplomacy. In your second part, you were trying to show historical evolution of the themes within city-to-city diplomacy. But I think you mentioned World War II and then jumped to 1990s. So I just wanted your comments, probably what happened probably before the First World War, and in between that time, what could have been some of the themes that emerged in city-to-city diplomacy?
Later, we'll just take them. The panelists will take notes accordingly at the back, right at the back by the door.
Thank you so much. I'll have one question for the panelist, and one goes to Lorenzo. Has this the city diplomacy lab, has it been practiced in Kenya? And maybe is there data for slum dwellers in Africa? To Victory, is there a way we can have a design thinking program or project to shift the minds of the young people to align with the city diplomacy ecosystem? And to our good brother, Joe, we came from defunct local government, and then we devolution. And under devolution, we have towns and we have municipalities. How can we align to the city diplomacy ecosystem? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give it to the person at the back before you come in front.
Thank you. I have two questions. One, I want to take a practical example from where I come from. I come from Mandera municipality, and recently we have been nominated as finalists in urban world green cities across the world. We were thinking of how best as Mandera municipality we go out there. We'll be having the finalist award at Netherlands this year on 25th September. So we are thinking how best we can use diplomacy, city diplomacy, to go out there when we are going maybe to receive the award, how best we can partner with other cities across the world as Mandera municipality. That is one question. The other question also, just taking a practical example of where I come from. As Mandera municipality, we also, if you look at the map of Kenya, we are the far extreme end, bordering Ethiopia and Somalia at the same time. We live, in an area where we have another two states bordering that municipality. So I also want to understand how best, as municipal, the topic is the role of municipalities or municipal role in global geopolitics. So how best we position ourselves, or how best we can use now city diplomacy. From where we sit, we now use this city diplomacy to play some geopolitical role at our level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to the three speakers and Winnie for the great moderation. I think it was Mr. Mayer who mentioned that diaspora and also the private sector could be part of city diplomacy. And in our discussions about urban governance, we also agree that the private sector, through private-public partnerships, for example, play an ever more important role in urban governance. I was just wondering which role can these both groups, private sector and also the diaspora, really play in city diplomacy, and can you also share, if you have any, concrete examples? Thank you.
Okay, I think maybe they can take another two. This just next to you. first, yeah? You still have your question behind that? Okay, I thought your hand was up. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So I just have a question to both Lorenzo and Victory. You spoke about inclusive multilateralism, but you at the beginning framed your conversation around not muddying the waters. And we're seeing a shortfall with countries being able to meet global commitments. Isn't the only viable solution muddying the waters? Just to understand what your viewpoints on this are.
Okay, let's get moving. We'll start with you.
Thank you very much to the ladies and gentlemen in the public for this wonderful questions. Each of them would require probably 1 hour to discuss. Very briefly. Oh my God, I start sweating. Well, evolution, exactly. It's much more complex than that. In fact, the city diplomacy starts, usually said in 1913, when mayors are united in Ghent for the Universal Expositions, and they realize that they are facing the same problems. For many years, it was mainly a leader-to-leader relationship. So this is why sometimes very small cities, they are connected with very big cities, and this is because they had personal relationship between mayors. This happened in France as well. Progressively, going through the decades after the Second World War, it became more and more technical. So there was an expansion in the direct involvement of technical staff in municipalities, having a relationship in all the sectors, from management of green areas to transportation to water and sanitation and so on. So this was the missing part in the discussion. Regarding the question on City Diplomacy Lab in Kenya and informal settlements, thank you very much for this question. Yes, we have been very active in Kenya through the partnership with the Columbia Global Center based here in Nairobi. And we have been conducting training activities for now, mainly online training activities. Our training activities are for free for municipalities, so we have to fundraise for it before, and this is why we don't have as many as we wanted, but we are working on expanding this as much as possible. We currently have a peer learning series on informal settlements going on with GIZ, the German Development Agency. So if you go to citydiplomacylab.net, you will find the link if you are interested to be part of this. The next session will be next week, June the 28th at 2:30 p.m., but better check on the website. Regarding how to use city diplomacy to partner up with cities, regarding the environmental issue, the best way to start establishing this city diplomacy relationship is really to identify a number of best practices that you can share. This will be your business card, your international business card, to say, well, we're doing very well greening the city, or natural-based solutions, for example. And this will be your business card to introduce to other cities, and that will want to learn from you, and meanwhile you will also learn from them. So that also leads to investments and attraction of capitals and talents. Regarding the diaspora and private sector, great question. This is usually called co-development. So when municipalities realize that diaspora, they represent a bridge, because they are connected to two territories. So you need, first of all, a political interest in engaging diaspora as part of this bridge. And the private sector is something that has to be part of it, because let's face it, it's harder to sell international actions. People will say, why don't you care about our potholes? Why don't you solve the security, the water and sanitation problems? You go to conferences everywhere in the world. You should be focusing on that. But well, if you involve local companies, you create employment, you create business opportunities, and this speaks for yourself. This explains why there is a good impact. And finally, inclusive, sorry for that, very, very briefly, the inclusive multilateralism. The question, how to define this multilateralism is extremely complex. I believe there is an integration of cities in a number of topics. They shouldn't be there to complicate, but really to provide the tools to understand the problem, because they know the problem better because they're closer to the population, and understand what is needed to implement them. So it's a technical addendum which is needed to the head of states sometimes and government that are sometimes far away to the specificity of the problem. So I would say their voice is really important in localizing those global agendas.
Thank you, thank you. We are running out of time. I'm sorry, Joe.
Mine will be very, very quick. Man, I will definitely. Now, coming back into the devolution, my brother, I think we have a very good structure, and it's going all the way down, where it starts from the ward, going to the constituency, going all the way up to the division itself. And I think there has to be some kind of a structure, because we can talk about this diplomacy, city-to-city diplomacy, and if the country is not aware and they're nowhere to be involved, then it becomes very, very difficult, and yet it's a very important subject. So mine will be a recommendation that we come up with a structure within the county, which will also include the a certain area of responsibility of the city diplomacy. The other one is Mandela. Congratulations. Go out there. You're the face of this country. People know you, and definitely will come for you because of the things that you have done. So when you go there, you become a good ambassador. Now, the other one is the diaspora, right? Yeah, these are our ambassadors. And you can imagine how much money they bring into your own country. They put so much, they bring in so much money into the economy of our country. So we can still use them within the government structure, whereby whatever the presentation we have, they are representative, and they are talking on their behalf in terms of promoting the country that they come from. In Kenya, we have very good people back in America and other part of the world. They send in so much to this country, but there has to be some kind of a structure whereby the government also give them the support, give them the encouragement. So I think it's a win for everybody when we have the diaspora guys coming in to try and help this country economically through this initiative that we are talking about.
Yes. Thank you. I think all questions have been answered, apart from the second question by the representative from Mandera, and then the last question, which was directed to me from Kathy. And question number 3 from the gentleman over there. So let me start with Kathy's question. I hope I got the name right. Okay. Now, cities participating in diplomacy would not necessarily model the waters, but the pattern of participation they choose may create some haze, which we would all be better off if we try to avoid. Honoring international commitments, most of these commitments are actually beneficial to some particular cities that may not be as represented within the national setting. But back home, those cities do have the capacity to mobilize and engage the national governments. The more strength in mobilization they can gather and exert on national government, the more it is possible for them to have these governments meet up the commitments that have been made. And they can also put some more international pressure by using already established networks like yours, like UCLG, etc. The challenge will be creating some more parallel structures or mobilizing in unconventional ways. But cities do have the strength, they can converge and take action even at the national level. Then the second question from the gentleman from Mandera, talking about cross-border regions in geopolitics. I think that's a very, very important question. If we recall, let's say the European Union, if we recall how the European Union started from the European Coal and Steel Community, and these were the brainwork of people from cross-border areas. We recall someone called Schuman. There's something, I think it was celebrated sometime in 2020, the Schuman 2.0, the Schuman Declaration, that was the precursor for the European Union. Schuman was from a cross-border region, and he got in touch with like minds from other cross-border areas, and they were able to meet locally and escalate their decisions across various jurisdictions. So you have that capacity. You are from a group that is represented in 3 very powerful countries: Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. So you now have a responsibility to meet and see what you can do, how you can speak on issues of peace and other issues affecting your region, and make them part of the agenda of these 3 countries, which I think are part of one international organization called, what's it called, IGAD? Yes, so you do have a serious responsibility there. And the final question I would like to react to, if I do have the time, I might react to one more. What do young people, how can young people design thinking projects? I think you're in the right place. Let's make use of think tanks, of organizations like this. Let's network. And then Lorenzo in his earlier presentation talked about the younger generation. Let's step down this debate. Let's create hashtags around it. Let's create some more ways of mobilizing young people. You know, young people are very easy to mobilize. Just when you get the right theme around which you can mobilize them. You know what I mean if you see what's happening at the moment. And finally, what happened before World War II? Permit me. What happened before World War II is that we were too divided. Exactly the point I made earlier. Diplomacy had not evolved to the extent where we can speak to ourselves for ourselves. We had too much divergent interests. We had associations and alliances here and there. And then it was difficult to have a common voice. It was difficult to agree that this is something universal. It was only after the First World War, Second World War II, that we were able to have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Prior to that, what did we have? You know, the ICRC, which was the late 19th century. Other than that, we had no global standard for what human rights are or what human rights were. We were even still discussing who humans are or who humans were. Some parts of the world say some people are 3/5 of a human. Not until after World War II were we able to define these things. And we've just been able to get these matters settled in the past 70, 80 years. So we've come a long way. You can understand why some of us are hesitating to throw everything that we've worked for 6,000 plus years to the drains. But let's see how it goes. That's a very good question. We can engage further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have any other minute? I think I want to wind it up, yeah? There's one question. Or online. Just read it for us. Can they read it? Or can the voice come? Can the person engage? Give them space to engage online, to ask the question? It's just weird. It can't come? Or have they typed it? They haven't typed it, but their hands were up. Oh. Ask them to ask. Oh, okay, they are on. Yeah, so I'm saying they have a chance now to continue to talk. We are giving them a chance to go. Go ahead, please. Could you ask your question? That's us. But they've left. Okay. Sorry for that. I think we've run out of the time, isn't it? For the managers, we've run out of time, I think 3 minutes off or 5. And I want to really appreciate this panel. The discussions have been very lively, and I think at least we have some marginal convergence that city diplomacy is there. It exists. We are only debating about its nature, how it takes place, whether they have capacity, and whether we should have a joint effort with states or whether they should go solo. So those are the debates that will continue tonight and tomorrow and even when we leave here. But I really want to thank the presenters. They were really great, coming from different perspectives and still able to engage very effectively. And the audience, of course, for listening and for also raising a number of questions. I know some of you still have questions, but unfortunately, we can't go on forever. Thank you very much. All of you are... Applause for all.
Thank you, Winnie. So we'll go for a break. Yeah, a short break, maybe 20 minutes. And all other questions you can ask the participants during the tea break. And then we'll be back here at 3:30 for another session. The online guys, you're going for a break, and then we'll be back. Send your questions. So guys, we can take our seat before we are about to start. So moving on to our next session and connecting with the previous session where we had questions on conflict, peace. We had some conversation on how cities are influencing policies and conversation, but are limited because of, in the sense of conflict and peace. Now this session is on conflict, instability, and migration, and can cities make diplomacy when states fail? I'd like to call Professor Francis Hayudi to lead the session.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I won't take a lot of time to speak. Instead, I shall just talk about how we shall move forward. We have three panelists on topics. I will call them topics because on their own we can discuss them, but we are choosing to put them together because they are interconnected. So this is how we shall proceed. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to make their presentation. Then after they make their presentation, we shall open the floor to questions and discussing points. So as they each present, please pay attention. One of our speakers is online. I think that's our second speaker, Harvey Nicole. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. But Jim and Professor Onditi are both here. So I guess we shall just proceed as they are listed, so that we do not confuse anyone. So without further ado, I will call upon Jim to give us his presentation. And then we shall have Harvey Nicole, and then Professor Onditi will wind up, and then we shall give an opportunity for the members to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a presentation, but I don't know if it was loaded here. That's not mine. All right. Thanks everyone very much again for being here, for listening to my presentation. I'm going to take maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute to introduce the Mixed Migration Center. I think there might be some people in the room who are not that familiar with us yet. But obviously, since I don't have that much time, if you have any further questions, feel free. So the Mixed Migration Center is a research unit inside the Danish Refugee Council, the INGO DRC. So we very much work as a research institution, but inside a humanitarian atmosphere, if you will. That means we do have links, we do entertain links with academia, but we are not an academic institution in itself. So what I will be presenting today, obviously, is our work linked to cities. Cities is not the only thematic focus that we have. Our work is very much research, any research that is linked to mixed migration. What we mean with that is people on the move regardless of status. So we actually advocate for researching people regardless if they are refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, etc., because they often have very similar experiences. So that's what comes through our research quite strongly. We interviewed them in transit locations, in locations of destination, in locations of origin. And obviously, well, in East Africa, we find all three of those. The first part of the presentation is about a mapping exercise that we conducted in partnership with UNHCR, and which was kind of Africa-wide. At the time, it was managed from our hub in Tunis, not in Nairobi. And it looked at cities along migration routes that link up together. So in this sense, it links a little bit to Lorenzo's presentation, but here the focus is solely on migration, refugee, asylum-seeking topics, etc. Maybe also good to mention that this research was presented for the first time at the already mentioned Afri-City Summit in Kisumu 2 years ago. So I must say the research is 2 years old. However, we do still think that it provides very valuable insights. But obviously, as we all know, things change quite rapidly. Some countries might engage in decentralization efforts, whereas others go in a different direction. So what to give one example, I think a quite stark example here is that at the time when we were based in Tunis and doing this study, Tunisia, I think, was really at the forefront of decentralization efforts in Africa. And now, unfortunately, 2 years later, we see it going in a totally opposite direction. So a lot of the examples that we listed and like the richness of the initiatives that Tunisian cities were engaged in, it's becoming less and less. However, for this presentation, I'll be mostly putting it in an East Africa context. So with that, I think here just a few key notions to start us off. What mixed migration looks like in East Africa, and particularly from an urban perspective. So I think what really kind of characterizes East Africa is the very strong narrative on refugees and refugee issues, which you see much less so in other parts of Africa or even other parts of the world. So we often choose for an inclusive language, so I'll be talking mostly about refugees and migrants. But what I would like to lift out here and talk about is the notion of secondary cities or intermediary cities that we already heard about before, as particularly these cities often play a very big role in receiving people as their first point of arrival, whereas they often have much less resources to deal with these new arrivals than bigger cities do. It's also important to mention that particularly in this region we find large populations of refugees, of people who have refugee status, who move back and forth between, for example, cities, but also camps and origin communities. Also, a very important factor in this region is that cities are increasingly home to rural migrants. They could be coming to cities due to the increasing effects of climate change, to find livelihoods, etc. And what is more at the core of what we do at the Mixed Migration Center, cities are also places of transit. It's not necessarily always where people find their final destination. It's also a place where refugees and migrants stop to work, raise funds, earn money before they move on. And to that extent, it's also notable that there's often considerable movement taking place within cities, where, for example, particular areas of the cities might be very well known for their work opportunities, versus in others, people from certain migrant communities or refugee communities might congregate and live together. So very briefly about the methodology of this mapping study, we mostly relied on key informants. So we spoke to a lot of the initiatives that we have already heard about today, including UCLG, the Mayor's Migration Council, C40, various initiatives led by UNHCR, by UN Habitat, etc. So when I go through the findings, I'll try here and there to name some examples, but because of the time, I can't name them all, so I hope there are no personal feelings if I miss out on some initiative that you've heard about that I couldn't include within this time limit. So if we move to key finding number 1, is since we were conducting this study together with UNHCR, we really looked at what they consider to be persons of concern from a mixed movement approach. So we're looking obviously at refugees, asylum seekers, but also increasingly at vulnerable migrants, as there is this recognition that migrants can often have very similar experiences and are in refugee-like situations, but without the status of being a refugee. So here we find that cities are involved either with other cities through partnerships, but also through linking up with organizations in different kinds of approaches to deal with these arrivals, these people transiting through their cities, etc. So what we see more and more in Africa particularly is this inclusive city approach, where it is considered that it is no longer relevant to just have activities that target refugee and migrant populations only, but it should be inclusive and it should look at their integration and also supporting host communities during that integration process. Second would be to have some refugee and migrant specific programming. You can think of some particular issues and vulnerabilities that these groups face according to their drivers of movement or what they experience along the journey, which sets them aside, obviously, from host communities. So you could be looking at, for example, programming that really focuses on all the psychological trauma and stress that refugees and migrants who have traveled in irregular situations have faced along the journey. What we also see, this is particularly, I guess, popular among funding institutions, dare I say, would try to curb migration. We're talking about the usual funding countries who are, from a political point of view, try to understand what they call the so-called root causes of migration. There are increasing activities around understanding why people migrate. And this is often because Europe and also the US have governments that are interested to know why are people migrating. And then at the same time, returnee programming. In this region, I would particularly mention Ethiopia, but also Burundi have very large populations of people returning, either sometimes through forced returns, but also through voluntary returns. And then finally, cities engaging together in furthering national, but also international refugee protection goals. So these are just some of the initiatives, and now let's see how that then further plays out into specific activities. So far we were I was more talking about approaches, but then obviously these approaches lead to very specific activities that cities might engage in together through linking up in a network. So I think it's already been mentioned quite a bit today, but obviously the peer-to-peer exchanges are is a very prominent one. The notion of sister cities, as it was already mentioned, and twinning obviously also falls under that. But we also increasingly see that happening just with just a thematic focus. So I guess before, if a city became twinned up with another city, then often that was in a lot of different areas or thematic areas. But we now also see that cities also find each other to particularly discuss topics of migration, immigration, etc. And that can then be, for example, cities who have different statuses along mixed migration routes. So you might find a city which can be considered a place of origin for people leaving, connecting with a place of destination, and then understanding why people move to that place, and also what happens after. Do people have further intentions, or do they have intentions to eventually return? I think during the time that we were doing this research, a particular example that came up a couple of times was the city of Dakar linking up with Barcelona and doing a lot of work with the Senegalese diaspora there. Producing data and knowledge, I guess this is for us the easiest one, as this is what the Mixed Migration Center does as well. But really taking it a step further, I mean, there's a lot of research on migration. Has been a very hot topic for at least a considerable amount of time. But bringing next level and really have it at a local or city level. So we often see that there's a lot of data on maybe national or even regional level, but not providing that granularity that cities could use to benefit from. So cities might see they are being mentioned in larger reports, but it would still not give them enough evidence to really act on a city level with regards to the needs people are facing, with regards to access to services, access to livelihoods, etc. So an example here I will actually provide later on in this presentation, as we have a project which is called For My Cities, where we survey refugees and migrants directly through enumerators who are refugees and migrants themselves. So it's basically people interviewing their own community members. And when we do that at a city level, it really provides this granularity going into neighborhood level, so that it becomes a collaborative effort together with cities, through validation workshops, through together coming up with the right research instruments, the questions that cities want to see asked, and then providing that very detailed evidence to them. Linking to experts, I think it's already also been mentioned quite a bit, but here obviously really looking at maybe additional capacities or cities can benefit from, and then particularly intermediary, secondary cities. I would like to mention here also, because Lorenzo is in the room, that we collaborated together with Colombia on organizing also a city diplomacy course on mixed migration, which we conducted now both once in person and last year online, to also provide cities with an opportunity to learn more about mixed migration, but even more so to provide a platform for learning, because obviously all these cities deal with migration in one way or the other. And I think it was particularly valuable to have people in the room ranging from cities in France to Italy to Tunisia to Libya to Morocco to Kenya, etc. Then the second part of the activities, looking at more formalized partnerships. So obviously this is kind of an extension of what peer-to-peer meetings are, right? But then formalizing that approach and having a more formal partnership. So there, the objective in a sense is different from the peer-to-peer meetings, that here obviously because it is more formalized, you can come up also with more advanced strategies and shared policies. Then that then culminates into joint strategies, which really look at how to inform local policy agendas, urban programming, etc., and eventually international joint advocacy and shared norms. And obviously, I provided some of the key examples there. You have the the Global Compact for Refugees, the Global Compact for Migration, which increasingly also include participation from cities, the 2030 agenda, but obviously also all the work that UCLG is involved in with cities and making sure that they get a seat at the table at these international fora. I think what I've found quite interesting when we were doing this research is that obviously one of the notions you have to take into account is geography. So what we found is that there are so many, like it was mentioned before, existing international urban initiatives where people link up, where cities link up. But what we found is that it is not explicitly routes-based. So even when cities discuss issues of migration, what we saw as a missing factor is that it would be even more effective if cities linked up, which are along the same migration route. So if you know that, for example, as a city representative, you're receiving a lot of migrants or asylum seekers from a certain country, maybe it could be very interesting to link up with a city from that country and to better understand what is driving people to move away and to come to, particularly to your city. Apologies for the abbreviations here. They stand for Central Mediterranean Route and Western Mediterranean Route. So these are the key mixed migration routes leading to the Mediterranean from both East Africa and West Africa. I think something to also quickly mention is that obviously in some of the countries along these vital routes, there are governments in place which work in a very centralized way. So what you will often find is that there are gaps because some cities, there is not a habit of participating in such initiatives, or they simply don't have the mandate to do so. They will need to go through a certain authorization process and don't have the liberty to directly engage as such. So I mentioned Tunisia earlier, which was kind of the exception in North Africa. I think now with what has been happening, we can place that country in the same category here, which makes it increasingly difficult to engage with cities in North Africa where there's really very centralized ways of governing in place. We found different kinds of relationships and coordination between cities and national governments, between cities and organizations, etc. Okay, I see I'm running out of time. So if there are any particular questions on this, I can address them later. But then maybe very briefly about the challenges. We conducted this research during COVID-19, so obviously a key challenge. I don't think I have to further explain why it was a key challenge. But yeah, once again, to really highlight these limited mandates that cities often have, but also legal voids. Sometimes it's just not very clear what cities can do and what they cannot do. So even you find city representatives themselves doubting if they can actually participate or take any of these actions forward because there's simply no legislation on it. Do I have 1 more minute? Okay, fine. So this is about a case study we did in Uganda, in Kampala and Arua in particular. And I wanted to highlight here the case of Arua. So as I already mentioned, our work with cities provides this really detailed approach and is a collaborative effort with cities so that they get the evidence that they need. So you can see here what are the key topics that we would survey refugees and migrants on who are residing in those cities, and also the workshops that we would hold together, not only with the city representatives, but from a more participatory approach, also other stakeholders. And here you can see how detailed it is. So this is Arua in Uganda, and the different areas and neighborhoods where the interviews were conducted, and also how that corresponds to different nationalities, as you would often see nationalities congregating in certain areas. then my final slide kind of provides an example of evidence uptake by Arua city, what they did with the evidence after the study was conducted. So you saw that it provided them with more of an advocacy position to discuss with the national government on, for example, refugee registration, which often is also a very centralized national topic, right? But also to work together with relevant stakeholders to provide more inclusive but participatory services, even to unlock more budget and more funding. So both budget from national authorities, but eventually also funding through grants, because now they actually have research and evidence that can showcase where the needs are and where they would need funding for. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Jim. We shall move on to the next presenter. Kindly note your questions. We shall take them after all the presenters are done. So I shall invite our next presenter. I don't know if he's online. Yes. So probably as we try and get them going. Nicole, can you hear us? Okay, just a moment. We can't hear you, but we can see you're ready. So just a moment. We sort out the sound. All right. Just say something.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good.
Do you have a PowerPoint presentation, or you shall just talk through? Yes.
No, I will share it with you. I think I will try as much as possible to have an angle that is slightly more policy or political to a large extent. What I will summarize here, I would say inductively and starting from a case study that has evolved a lot, as it was just mentioned a minute ago, the case of Sfax in Tunisia. What I want to do is learn from this case study, share with you what my team and I learned from Sfax and the subsequent development. We were in Sfax in January 2023, and then in February 2023, the president of Tunisia said publicly that sub-Saharan migrants were responsible for terrorism, insecurity, and he had a very xenophobic speech and racist speech on them, leading to, of course, a situation that is not under control at all, and that prevents any possible positive and constructive management of migration, if I can use this term. So that's what I want to do. Start with this case study, learn from it, and then try to see what we can all learn from a political, diplomatic angle on cities today. And what I would like to insist on is that, in my view, Tunisia is no exception. And this is maybe the only point where I would disagree with what was said before. What we saw in Tunisia, in a very authoritarian way, also happens in East Africa in a very different manner. We can discuss it during the Q&A, but it happens in Ethiopia with special economic zones. It happens in many other places where exploitation and modern forms of slavery using IDPs and refugees still prevail. So let's go. Yes. So the study comes from a partnership with different actors that you can see here. We actually went to 6 cities to try to understand how these secondary cities, and I will go back to what it can mean for us, secondary cities, in a minute. How can secondary cities first deal in practice with migration? Because they are the front line of welcoming migrants, providing services, and they have no other choice. They have no other options. In Sfax, for instance, roughly 1 million people, you have officially 20,000 migrants, unofficially, when we did the study, approximately 80 to 120, so 10% of the population. So you have no choice but to take this into account at different level, service provision, but also potentially economic dividends, cultural aspect, and so on. So they are really at the front line. So we, Samuel Hall, assessed in particular 3 cities, Garissa in Kenya, Saint Louis, and Sfax. And just one word of apology. I cannot be with you today because I'm literally 500 meters away from the conference, but I tested positive for COVID, so I have to stay at home. So, but I really wanted to apologize for that. And I also ask you to be kind to me because I'm still have a strong headache. So I'm not fully operational, let's say. So the problem we had assessed is that, in short, African intermediary cities have become nodes of migration. If you have a look at all the cities we mentioned, in particular Agadez in Niger, Saint Louis or Sfax, Sousse as well in Tunisia, they have become places where networks are organized. Sometimes when we talk about networks of migration, we might have ideas of smuggling, but the reality is often different, where actually human networks are developed and organized. And where in the near future, let's say in 2020, 2040, the rise of cities in the world is the size of 1 million people, which is more or less equivalent to what we call a secondary cities, will mainly be in Africa. So what are these intermediary cities? First, there are points of connection, which I just highlighted. They are in general less prioritized economically, which is definitely the case of Garissa in Kenya, but of course of Sfax and Sousse in Tunisia. But they are also rapidly urbanizing cities for 2 reasons. Very often rural movements, internal rural movements, but also, they have become transit hubs, even if, again, transit is not necessarily, if I mentioned it, does not necessarily mean that people will stay only temporarily. Transit can last for years. They are hubs for migration movements. That's how we define them. So the case study now. I put a few pictures here to try to give you a sense of this fieldwork. On the left, you have the Medina, and all around the Medina, you have the vibrant economic life. You cannot find sub-Saharan economic migrants or migrants, whatever the label you use, inside the Medina, but you can find them around the Medina. And you have a lot of economic interactions, sometimes for phones, sometimes to identify people, workforce in the construction sector, or to harvest olives or almonds. So you have a lot of interactions between those people and local residents. So we did a lot of interviews, semi-structured interviews with migrants lasting up to 3-4 hours, 34. But you can see also on the right, we also interviewed groups. Here you have supporters fans of the local football teams, openly racist and anti-migrants. It was a very interesting focus group discussions where we identified the subtle difference between anti-migrant feelings and racism. So conceptually, we try actually, instead of putting figures on a reality, which on a case study like that is of almost zero interest, we try to understand the dynamics, the subtle dynamics that you have in what people tell you, in the words they use. And then you have another 2 pictures. Bottom right, you have a slogan from the football fans, and I won't translate it. And on the left, you have a cemetery, which is 15 kilometers from Sfax, where bodies, you see graves here, bodies of, after shipwrecks, where bodies are buried. So briefly now, the migration dynamics within Sfax. You have the city of Sfax at the center, and you see all these dynamics. So Sfax is really a hub for migration. But where I would insist on is that it's not, and it has changed a lot. Sfax and Tunisia in general is not only a transit country, which was when we did the survey, the political narrative. No, it's also a country of departure, a country of origin, if I can say so, for many young Tunisians who are frustrated and who are ready to burn their life. That's the word used in Arabic, to burn their life through this trip. So they will risk their lives. And we spoke to many young Tunisians as well who told us we are on the same boats. We use the same boats, to a large extent, the same networks. So there is this surprising, this is not something I had expected, to be honest. There was a strong feeling of solidarity between these young Tunisians, sometimes poor, sometimes of rural background, but sometimes also very educated, but without the legal means to make it to Europe. And sub-Saharan African, whatever the reasons and the drivers of this migration. So the drivers of migration, again, it's not something I will discuss today because the question of drivers in migration is always very controversial. You don't live for one reason only. There is never only one driver. So it can be economic, but also because you're threatened, etc. So there are multiple drivers. But roughly, I brought them on the right. What is more interesting here is the drawing on the left. What is the diplomatic arrangement in Sfax? And this is where actually I start dealing with the real topic of this conference. The horizon is the Euro-Tunisian dialogue. So you have the Commission, namely, but the Commission that, of course, puts a lot of pressure to contain and to reborder Europe, to contain migration and to reborder Europe, especially by promoting economic development in exchange of a stronger securitization, of course, in Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, but of course, in Turkey and other countries. But it's also true of Ethiopia. It's also true of Kenya. It's also true of almost all countries in Africa. So this Euro-Tunisian dialogue is no exception. In the case of Tunisia, one could legitimately argue, and this is what all the analysts in Tunisia told me, that Europe is in a position of supporting dictatorship. So migration management is about that, basically. Then you have the national framework. In this case, a total absence of migration framework that can create a bridge between the national understanding of migration in Tunisia, which is briefly, it's a national security question. All refugee issues should be dealt with by UNHCR, and municipality received a strict order not to interfere or interact with migrants. We spoke to the municipality of Sfax several times, extremely bright individuals, very progressive, very committed, receiving, of course, almost miserable salaries, but very involved and aware that basically it was part of a much bigger game. So this national framework with a total absence of support from, I would say, the center, and by center, I'm not saying Tunis as a geographic location, as a city, but as a center of power, to other cities, including Tunis, but also Sousse, Sfax, etc. So the absence of bridge between the center of power, the government, and municipalities make migration unmanageable, whatever Europe wants or says or pretends. And de facto, all the money spent in Tunisia, all the money spent in Morocco will support authoritarian governments. I'm not saying anything new here. You can read it in the news. So now at the local level, what we saw, and here it confirms absolutely what was said before, we saw the support, including of big agencies, so international organizations, IOM, UNHCR, and others, at the national level to actually do their best. We are in January 2023. Things have changed. We'll see that in a minute. To support the best they could municipality and to find solutions. But of course, when we talk about numbers, it's not manageable. Again, the resources are scarce. Very often there is an instrumentalization of, and it was mentioned before, legal void. There is an instrumentalization of rights and legal aspects that make it impossible in practice for these organizations to do their job. So beyond the fact that you have high numbers and only scarce resource, there are also multiple barriers in practice that make this support to migration impossible. And of course, at the same time, municipalities keep telling us we have to deal with that. We see that the social cohesion in the beautiful city of Sfax is disappearing. We see a fragmentation. We see more and more xenophobic speech. We see the 15% of Black Tunisian telling us we have come back to the 19th century. We receive stones in the streets, we are being harassed, etc. So we see this kind of explosion of a model that was already, of course, fragile. And this is happening in their city. So they actually receive and they actually experiment the consequences of political irresponsibilities. On the right, you have one of the reasons that explain that. The rise in the number of migrants reaching the Italian coast between 2020 and 2023. The question is it because of that graph that you should apply an irresponsible political decisions in the north of Africa and in other contexts? I think the answer is clear. Everyone is saying it, but it doesn't mean it's not because you have the knowledge that we will take politically wise decisions. So lessons learned. I will go very briefly through these lessons learned. If you read the report, you'll see there are many more. I only wanted to insist on the few lessons learned that are, in my view, relevant to our discussion today. Questioning migration governance and migration management. The migration management, indeed, sounds nice. And one thing I want to insist on, all the concept you will find in the field of migration sounds nice. All of them. But they are always dual, in the sense that they can be instrumentalized. The label of refugee can be instrumentalized, the label of economic migrant. Same thing with migration governance. Migration governance has become, over time, a way to contain, exclude, and support sometimes authoritarian regimes. It's a very short-sighted view, especially in a context in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have more and more conflicts, more and more impact of climate change. Second thing, rethinking mixed migration and transit migration. This concept, exactly like the two I mentioned, can be great. However, they can also be heavily instrumentalized, in particular, to hide very important differences in terms of rights, access to rights, and to minimize, instead of elevating those rights and increasing and finding the best common denominator, finding the lowest common denominator. And this is what we also saw in all the cities we assessed. Third, applying a critical race lens to migration dynamics in Sfax. Indeed, it's true that, it's true of Sfax, but it's true of all the places where we went. Inclusive local narratives. We all often see xenophobic narratives and racist narratives as a kind of contingent consequence of political crisis. No, they are narratives that are carefully developed. And in the case of Tunisia, in the case of France, in the case of many other contexts, those narratives need a fight. They need actually, in terms of analysis, and not only in terms of disaggregating data, but in terms of analysis, we need to understand this narrative, and we need to apply a race lens to migration dynamics wherever we work. And then using an intersectional lens to understand vulnerability, violence, and agency. I don't have the time to develop this point, but the question of violence and how violence is used against precarious communities, and especially women in places like Sfax, is today has changed a lot. This is something we saw. And we interviewed women as well, even if it was more difficult, because some of them had gone through, but they have all gone through the worst you can imagine. I mean, the type of violence that is imposed to them is, again, strategic. The same way that the racist narratives are used strategically in the and I would not say in the migration governance field, but it's one of the consequences of what we call migration management today. So xenophobic governance. In February, we have the speech of Kais Sayed. The historian and Tunisian intellectual Ali Ben Saad insist on the fact that it's a fiction of ethnocultural identity and homogeneity, but he also said that it was very carefully built, and it's something that had been built in perfect alignment with an overall diplomatic arrangement, which is based on sovereignty, on governance between countries, between national interests, and not at the city level, not at the level where people interact and have to deal with each other. They want it, they don't want it, it's another problem, but where they have to make decisions for tomorrow, for the common existence. So I think it's very important to see that these xenophobic discourses and xenophobic governance, which I call xenophobic governance here, is actually not the fact of an old man, but really something that was carefully designed. So it raises, and I mentioned it, I have a few questions here that are all important. It raises clearly the role of the diplomatic role of Europe and migration governance, including to a certain extent of international organizations. And I would go even further, including of my organization, including of MMC, including of all these organizations. How do we passively or actively, consciously or not, support this type of discourses? We cannot say, I'm just doing my job, I'm just providing figures, I'm just providing research. We need to go way beyond that. What is the impact on local migration actors? I received, over the past 3 weeks, 3 emails of people who were part of the workshop we organized in January 2023. They managed to leave because they had the good networks, the education, blah, blah, blah. They made it to Europe, 2 in France, 1 in Italy, because they had received death threats. They were all working for NGOs. 1 was from Cameroon, 2 from Tunisia. So what I mean is that you have a real impact on people. And not only migrants, but also people who actually are human rights activists and who try to actually build fragile, sometimes precarious city diplomacy. And what about the political cohesion? I mentioned the black community in Tunisia, 15% roughly, which it's exploding. I mentioned the youth gap, the gap with the young generation in Tunisia, a country governed by a gerontocracy. This xenophobic governance will have an impact, not on the long run, but on the very, very short run, on a possible implosion of the country.
All right. I'm sorry.
This is the final.
Yes, your time has run out.
Can I just wrap up on this? It's the final slide.
30 seconds, please.
Okay, good. So in terms of what can city diplomacy mean? I went back to the original sense and meaning of diplomacy. Etymologically, it means a paper folded in 2. It's a way to legitimate someone. It's an official, it's an ambassador, it can be a doctor, a lawyer, it can be a student. If you have a diploma, a diplomacy, you can use it to travel and to go to other places. It's actually a way to migrate from one place to another and to become legitimate. So can there be a diplomatic legitimacy, if I can say so, of cities? I mean, we have no choice. And that's a big finding of our research in these 6 countries with our partners, is the only way to avoid xenophobic disintegration of countries, including in cities like Garissa. Is the only way to avoid a migration understanding, which is purely based on sovereignty, national and identitarian models, is the only way to avoid also a political fragmentation inspired by neoliberal depoliticization of communities. So more and more a distance between the center and the periphery, which is at the heart of any neoliberal movement. And then it's also a way for us to question what new form of colonialism can be. Not between the North and the South, but within each country, including in Africa. What are the new forms of colonialism in Kenya, in Tunisia, in Ethiopia? And I think this lens at the urban level is extremely legitimate for that. So the next political model and the next city diplomacy, for me, is transnational, and it's beyond and sometimes against national models. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Quite interesting. I hope the rest of the audience, like me, has so many questions for our panelists. Same to all those of you who are online. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat section so that we may address them when we get to the QA session. Last but not least, allow me to call to the stage Professor Francis Onditi for his presentation. Then, of course, after his presentation, we can take the questions that we all might have. Welcome, Prof. Onditi.
Thank you. Thank you, my namesake. Can I use this? Yes. Yeah, so I hope. Oh yeah, it is actually. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. So thank you very much, the organizers. I think I won't take much of our time because I can see the day is coming to an end. Sunrise comes with its own problems. People start thinking the traffic in Nairobi and all that. But nevertheless, it's important that we gather here. And when Sina asked me to come and present, I was scratching my head and asking myself, how can I present, you know, on urban issues? Where is Professor Mitula? She was my professor. She's my professor at University of Nairobi, and I talked to Lena. Lena, have you talked to Professor Mitula? Oh, okay. If she's coming, then I will. If she's not, then I don't have the moral authority to talk about this subject. And of course, the long-serving, you know, councillor, mayor here. He was, you know, a kitchen name, you know, many years ago. It is great. So I think it's a great combination you have here. Lena, you've succeeded in your conference. But I'll just share the studies that we are doing in my lab. I have a lab within the university. We call it a conflictology lab. I am not an expert on these matters, diplomacy as such, especially city diplomacy, Elena, Sina. My area is conflict. I study conflict and evolution of conflict in the society. Sometimes people misconstrue that for mobilization. It's not mobilization. It is just when you are studying how conflict evolves in the society, you must work with the people, you must greet them and shake them and meet them wherever they are, isn't it? When I check the latest statistics about urbanization, and please correct me, the experts here, in Africa, you know, we are talking about 45% urbanization rate, and globally is about 57%. So meaning Africa is not where it was 20, 30, 40, 50. And so, you know, this heritage is very important. How does this heritage fit into the global diplomacy, as we know from the beginning? Can this heritage, or can the new diplomacy that we are thinking about in future and the new alliances make a difference? I think those are very important questions. And what are the possibilities of a global infrastructure for peace? Because those are the questions that I get involved in as a researcher in conflict. And then how does that connect to the subject that Sina has put together very, very intelligently? And I hope I'll make a small contribution, Sina. If I don't, please just say you are useless. And I will remain useless because I don't think my work is very important. It's not more than anyone else here, but it's just a small contribution that I would. So in our lab, we try to work within certain frameworks or certain thinking. There are two thinking that pull against each other. The first thought process is when people come together, they make peace. Another set of thinking is when people are far apart, they kind of conflict and so on and so forth. So this kind of hypothesization or this kind of theorization is what informs my lab. But then the main proposition or the main idea that people like Allport have put forward is moving towards the first one, what they call the positive conduct. That when people meet together, they gather together like we are gathered together here, we're likely to make peace. And so we use marketplaces as a laboratory in my lab. And these marketplaces were established on the borders in this country and in Africa as it is. They are markets that were established between borders of different communities. They become economic structures, but initially they are not necessarily economic structures. They were like barazas where people meet together, they would resolve their problems, etc. And you'll find most of those markets would be located in areas that are conflicting, communities that are maybe conflicting because of many reasons, which I don't think this conference is made for that, maybe for another day. So we have spotted around 7, marketplaces in this country. We've mapped them. And today I'll be presenting a case study of 2 markets in western part of the region of the country. So that we can be able to learn a few things. And the overall question for you, Sina, is how can this network or conduct that happens in this market, can it provide some appetite, for some kind of infrastructure for peace, what I'm calling global infrastructure for peace? If we can establish that when people come together, they can cohere and they can have positive conduct as it is here, then how do we transform this market into places that can be structures for peace and subsequently spaces for diplomacy or borrow best practices for diplomacy? Those are some of the questions that we endeavor with. I won't go much into them, but they're very important because then they help us to pull the strings together. In the sense that what is happening in market A vis-a-vis market B. You find some markets are densely networked. This is what we found out. You'll see that as we move towards the findings. The question is, when a market is highly dense networked, one that is sparse between the two, are you going to choose, are you going to conclude that one that is highly dense or one that is highly networked is more peaceful or the other? Those are the questions that initially we thought highly dense networked markets or spaces are more likely to have people working together, moving together, and you see, sharing things together, and therefore peaceful. But the studies seem to be, not confirming that so much. We haven't concluded. It's a long-term study. We shall continue to get result, but it is pointing towards something else. It's not necessarily reinforcing that a position that Allport and others had held initially. It looks like there are other underlying factors or issues that speak to peaceful coexistence as opposed to people just coming together and living together. And we always give this example. When a wife and a husband lives in different places, the day you meet, there is a lot of excitement. The more you live together, the more you are likely to conflict and many issues come in. And some people have decided, you stay in that city, I'll stay in that city. And let's meet after 3 months or 6 months or 3 weeks or whatever. That seems to be speaking to our social relations. And it looks like it's something we can think about in our cities, in the way we do our diplomacy and the way we conduct our conflict resolution. There is, in these marketplaces, one of the things that we try to look at is because there is this theorization that when people get into the market is like a melting pot, like what people used to think about America. You go there and everybody comes together. It doesn't matter where you come from. The identities get diffused and you become one person. That is what we thought initially, that these markets are functioning, they are function. But we are realizing now, when you'll see the findings, people get themselves into their pockets, For example, if you are in Chile, and by the way, the choice of this market was based on the on different factors, but one is areas that have been having conflict, like Chwele is right at the heart of the border between Bungoma and Sabot. Most of you study conflict, you will know what happened in that area. But we also contradicted with an area that is a bit peaceful, Kiboswa. Kiboswa it has 3 areas, Western Vihiga district, Kisumu, and Nanti. That is also a bit, has had issues in the past, especially issues of border. But the Chwele one is more conflicting than, it has more issues than the Kiboswa. And therefore, we wanted to make some kind of comparison to know which one would make the difference moving forward. But these are some of just approaches that we use in addressing our research questions, and a comparative case study was conducted. We are trying to set up experiments in those areas because this is obviously work in progress, because one of the areas we are narrowing down is the groups, associations in those markets. What does these associations and group imply when it comes to conduct? And, do they mean anything when it comes to coexistence or lack of the same? If a market is having more groups, does it have anything to do with the peaceful coexistence or not? Because we are studying these markets as a microcosmic, as a representation of the society. We are using it as a social laboratory. And so we may generalize, but in some cases we may deal with the specific case studies so that we don't fall into the trap of, of generalization. So these are major findings. I will show some illustrations in terms of the analytics because we use the social network analytic or the approach. But this is what is coming out. Initially, we thought that Chwele has so many groups, and when we conducted the network, kind of measurements, we realized that for sure, both in terms of groupings and individuals, they are highly networked. In other words, one person would be networked to so many other individuals. One group could be networked with very many others and compared to Kiboswa. And when we measured that against conflict prevalence, because it's a study that we've been doing in different phases, the prevalence, yes, is at 15.9%. But when you look at it, yes, Chwele has a lower, slightly lower prevalence. But when you compare the two, 2.4 compared to 2.6, you realize that not far away from each other. But what these figures means is that Chwele, the prevalence is actually higher in Chwele compared to Kiboswa. Yet Kiboswa has a lower kind of network, so we shall get into that. But the reason why we did this high resolution, it was just to look at how the built environment looks like between the two places. Because the built environment also tells us so much about, the network. You can already see Kiboswa is a bit sparse. It's not highly, built. Chwele it is, and actually this is reflected in the establishment of networks. When we did our research, it had so many of those groupings, but again, those groupings are highly networked. But we also came to conclusion, one of the conclusions, that the network or the density may also mean something else. It may mean that the rate at which information flows is very high when the area is highly networked. And so if the negative vibe exists, it's likely to reach many people. We haven't measured that, but we are getting there to measure that. But the initial findings are telling us that. And so that explains why highly densely networked spaces are also having higher prevalence for conflict. Okay? Maybe because of the rate at which information flows, and so if it is information that is negative, it's likely to reach many people, and therefore there will be fire, etc., etc. But you can also look at it positively in terms of this information, if it is a positive information and it's able to reach as many people, as many groups as possible, how can that be transformed into an infrastructure for peace? Or how can that be transformed into an official diplomatic architecture that can be used by governments or local governments in that case? So we conducted our main approach in analytic. We use the social networks, and this is about individuals. We did not use specific names in this particular one, but in our raw data we have their names. But for ethical reasons, obviously, we can't put here their names. Now this is Chwele. You can see how the web looks like, highly dense. You can calculate associativity, you can calculate the density or centrality or betweenness. Those ones we have done. It was not for this occasion, but I can tell you Chwele is performing very high on all those parameters that or techniques that we are applying in analytics. But just figuratively, you can see Kiboswe is sparse, a bit sparse. It doesn't tell us a lot in terms of whether people are really getting into networks. This is still individual networks, and you can see the Chwele, that is the Bungoma Sabaot, is highly, and perhaps also because it's an area that has experienced the conflict. That is just some of the reflections we were having. Maybe they are more sensitive to forming groups that are positive, that can make a difference in terms of conflict resolution. Kiboswa has had the underground conflict especially between the cattle keepers and the fishermen on the other side, but not so much. It hasn't been as intense as the one that you'll find in Mount Elgon. And maybe that explains why the two areas have different networks. And even when we analyze the groups, this is what we found out. That, whereas one is highly connected, because the way we analyze this is looking at the nodes and edges. The more nodes and edges are connected, if you were to calculate associativity and centrality and betweenness, you'll definitely find Chwele is performing higher compared to Kiboswa, because Kiboswa looks like there are groups, but they are a bit scattered, isn't it? They are not very organized for some reasons that we are still interrogating or investigating. But what comes out of this is that is the next question as to whether highly, densely networked space contribute to a peaceful coexistence or not, and what implication does that have in terms of diplomatic architecture? Can we pick something from this and try to see whether we can create a global, infrastructure for peace and therefore diplomacy or diplomatic architecture? A question for Sina, but. Earlier on, I had said this, that ethnicity is not as people have perceived initially. That, you go in the market and you would go and find people mixing. Like in that area, for example, if you take you take Kiboswa, you'll find a Luo seated with a Luya, or seated with a Kikuyu or a Nandi. You don't see that a lot. That is the conception that Allport put forward when they talked about positive conduct in terms of theory that explains how you make peace in a society. We are trying to interrogate that. I'm not saying we have challenged it yet. The data is not enough to give it a full-blown challenge, but it is telling us that the communities are still clustering themselves. If you go to one area, you'll find one community is dominating. For example, here you'll find the graphs are indicating that the green are higher in numbers, and those higher in numbers represent one particular community. If you look at the key, will tell you that. Maybe it's not showing very well, but it can show you. The same to the other market. And so this idea that a market marketplace will provide a melting pot seem to be a bit something that we need to continue interrogating. It is not the truth as we thought, that people will mix or people will forget about their ethnic concaves, but they kind of disintegrate. And that has implication as to whether we are going to create these markets into infrastructure for peace or not. Because if people are still, assembling themselves into different ethnic groups, it means that, and what they are communicating in those spaces, I did not present the qualitative data or the specific narratives that we got from them, but I can tell you there's a lot in those markets, because when people put themselves in, and how can the alliances between municipality and city, or state, harvest those heritages into diplomatic practices, because there are so many things that come out of those connectivities between people. For example, kinship, isn't it? When people are likely to solve their problems when they have confidence and trust with each other, as opposed to when you declare a policy to be followed and they're not very sure about that policy. But when people are working together with their neighbors or with their relatives or people who look alike or people who have...
Is a tension between the center, and by center, again, I'm not saying necessarily the capital city, but the political center, so the national level, which focuses on issues of international diplomacy, very often, in the case of the African continent with Europe, all the issue of migration governance, and the subnational, and in particular, the municipal level, which focuses more on very practical and I would say human-centered aspect of how do you deal with more people. Sometimes it's a matter of a week, sometimes of a day, an influx of people. How do you deal with their presence, potentially with the economic dividends you can generate from them, etc. So the type of questions are drastically different. At the national level, the focus is more on sovereignty, political dialogues with Europe. At the local level, it will be sometimes on social tension, sometimes on potential integration, sometimes on how you create and reshape the social fabric. But the reality at the same time is that the center does not give enough resources, technical skills, legitimacy to the periphery to do in an optimal manner its job. Hence the tension and what we called very often a national disintegration in many countries we have assessed. And in this regard, migration appears as a kind of touchstone to test political model. And this tension between the center and the periphery, the national level, the municipal level. On the second question, so that I wrap them up, and then I remain, of course, available, but if I have the second one in mind, with Scalobi, Kakuma, and Dadaab, I think it's not really about competition of resources. If you consider Dadaab, what we call the host communities, in a radius of 50 kilometers around Dadaab, we're talking about 15,000 people. The camp itself, if you include documented and undocumented, is probably 450,000. Dadaab, thanks to Dadaab, in this county, you have many NGOs coming, you have an economic activity generated. So, of course, when you speak to Garissa, they know that the camp itself is, it's been said many times, a marketplace. It generates circulation, it generates formal and informal influx of monies from Somalia. It generates a lot of things that contribute to the economic activity and that today makes the question of, makes Dadaab a legitimate city because it's already a social, economic and political key actor in Kenya and in the region more globally. So I would say that the real question is not really about the tension between local communities, host communities, and refugees, but more how do you transform this situation in concrete economic, social, potentially cultural dividends for Kenya. And it segues nicely with the presentation, the last presentation, on how people can live together. I really liked this presentation on all the social networks. It would be fascinating actually to do the same in Kakuma and Dadaab, two incredible marketplaces with more or less diversity. Somali in Dadaab and more diverse in Kakuma. But I think it's really about understanding that it's not only economic dividends, competition over resources, but an incredible opportunities if we turn these camps into cities connected to the rest of Kenya, to turn them into the places they can be. Places of culture, of society, of interactions, of community between Somali culture, Kenyan culture, and multiplied interactions.
Yeah, this is working. Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think Hervé already quite extensively responded to two of the questions. I can briefly, answering to you, Sina, I very much agree with what has been said, to a point that you often find that cities are not allowed to work on migration, but at the same time, there are migrants arriving every day, and then they just have to figure it out themselves. And indeed, I think the national government will stick to its political approach, maybe indeed deals with the EU or any other multi-stakeholder interest they might have. But that doesn't take away from the fact that cities continue dealing with these issues. So I think what a lot of these networks and partnerships have also been trying to do is operate on those fringes of what cities are allowed to do and what they cannot do. And also discuss good practices, even with limited mandates, how cities can maybe make a difference and ensure that social tensions are not at stake, that social cohesion can be promoted, and that people with real needs are actually supported, although often, unfortunately, in kind of like a haphazard, not organized way, because once again, they don't have the mandate to officially do it. Then with regards to formalized cities, thank you for coming back to that. I felt like I didn't have enough time during the presentation to really talk about it. I did want to mention it briefly because we had this project in this region, including Nairobi, Kampala, Arua. It's also been rolled out in other regions with our colleagues in Latin America. I lifted out the Arua case study precisely so because they came back to us with, okay, now we have been able to achieve this. But obviously, that doesn't mean we couldn't have been speaking about Nairobi either. It would be great to maybe have a follow-up conversation at some point. I think the case of Arua, what makes it so specific and why we could draw this evidence uptake or learning more easily is their very particular context, right? So Ugandan government quite recently promoted Arua to officially being a city. So they received some more capacity, some more resources than they had previously. And I guess together with the study, then that gave them the evidence to also act upon some of that new space that they had. So they felt that they did have more space to negotiate with the national government to actually apply for all this migration funding that is available and very often now. So it is encouraged that local authorities or local entities apply, and we move away from that model where international NGOs try to do everything in Africa, right? And I think that also links a little bit, that last point, to what has been discussed about the Shirika plan, that I think one of the key outcomes here would have to be that we ensure that less and less people are, hopefully, are dependent on the aid of international NGOs, but that we create an environment where more and more people find livelihood opportunities that match their skills, that match their interests, that match where they come from and where they want to go to in the future, and that our role can be more shaped to really focusing on the people who have real needs, who have real concerns, but that more and more people also find themselves to be to find sustainable ways themselves to economically support. Did I miss anything? Oh yes, Mandera. Thank you very much for that question. Actually, it's quite interesting that you're here because we are currently, I think you're very right to say that this cross-border context is a very unique one because you will not just face people coming in who are fleeing conflict or war, etc., but also a lot of pendular and circular movements back and forth between the different countries. So just to mention that with MMC, we're currently working on a specific research tool to pilot migration in these kind of border areas. And we're going to use Mandera as a pilot study. So hopefully, I don't have a concrete answer for you what policies should be in place to support, but at least we will be providing hopefully some more evidence and data. It's not just Mandera, but I think in East Africa there are quite a number of cases of where borders are quite porous, where borders have been formed by former colonizing powers, which don't necessarily always make a lot of sense, and where you just see that people cross regularly. So hopefully this can be an ongoing discussion, and happy to keep that discussion going and remain in touch. Then there was one more question on resource competition when upscaling to cities and towns. I think this was with regards to governments versus cities, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I think this is maybe second to further crystallizing out first what cities are allowed and not allowed to do. So I think when there's more of an understanding as well between governments and cities, which mandates belong to whom, then it would also become a bit clearer when cities ask for certain resources that they actually have something written on paper. They have their mandate to point and say, oh, but we are supposed to do this, so then this resource should come our way. I think I pause here and hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll not comment on migration because I don't study migration. But the question that the mayor asked about, how to deal with security issues in city using diplomacy, city diplomacy. I think it's important we understand there are three things that, from a conflictology point of view, that drives conflict in urban centers, Mayor. One of them is identity, two is rights, and then three, we have groupings. So once we know those are the main drivers, the question is, how do you create positive conduct among people in urban areas so that you turn the conflicting environment into some kind of dialogue or mediation or whatever kind of conflict resolution you want to put in place? Because you can't use the approach from other places because people in the urban center, they don't fight about boundaries. In any case, you don't have a boundary because somebody is on top of you, you are on top of another person, so there's no boundary. And so the question is those three: identity, rights, and of course groupings. And then this, in terms of policy, what this means in terms of policy is, I think our cities need to develop strategies that are to do with the social networks. You know, you build social networks among the groups of people so that you can utilize the energy or convert the energy into something that is productive. And I think there is one particular city in Africa that has used that. Anybody here from South Africa? Cape Town. Cape Town has you've been in Cape Town? Okay, there is Kaliesha, is it Kalies? Yes. Yeah, it's one of the areas that had very, very adamant kind of groupings, you know, gangster. Any study on gangsterism in Africa, you would make reference to Kaliesha. And they have come up with the strategies on how to deal with that. It may not be the best, but I think one of the strands that University of Cape Town colleagues were using is a grouping, how to turn these groupings into positivity or positive conduct. they succeeded to some level, we can do the evaluation and know how much that can be helpful or how much that can be replicated in other contexts like Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, whatever. But I think the point is, the guiding principle is you cannot use a method that you use in the rural areas to solve problems in the urban areas. You must be driven by those factors that are driving conflict in the urban areas. And I think, yeah, the mayor.
All right. It is safe to say we are done for the day, unless there are any pressing issues. I don't think so. So I will say thank you to our panelists and, of course, you wonderful audience. I shall now pass the mic over to Emmanuel for any last messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Onditi. Thank you, Professor Francis. We appreciate your time, acknowledging that exams are ongoing. Yeah. So we are done for the day, day one. We meet tomorrow by 9. We are starting the first session on geopolitics. There's been a lot of conversation on that session. So we meet tomorrow at 9. Thank you.